Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Tom Meitza with the 14-Day Real Estate Investor. Right now, everybody's starting to join in the room. We've got people joining us from all over the country. So we're going to give it a couple minutes in order to let people get online. What I'd like you to do right now is I have opened up a chat box for you. If you could just shoot me a message and let me know that your audio is actually working well, that would be terrific. And then we'll give it a minute or so, and then we're going to kick off the program. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to open it up so you can see that I'm actually a person and not a figment of your imagination. I want to welcome you here to the course today. By the end of today's program, you're going to have what you need to know in order to buy your first cash flowing property. I got started in real estate in 1987, and it's been an incredible business for me. It's created a lifestyle that I couldn't have done anywhere else. Now, a lot of times when people see a free webinar, they wonder, well, why would somebody do it for free? What's in it for them? Well, we actually do it for free for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I like to pay it forward. I've had people help me, and it's made a big difference in me actually being able to get ahead in real estate. And I've also do it because it makes good business sense. Now, 1 second here, ladies and gentlemen. We just have somebody having trouble getting in. Okay, we took care of that. But the reason it makes good business sense is, think about this. What I do is I give away a ton of free training. I give away a lot of videos. I give away a lot of material. And I'm going to do the same for you here today. In fact, as you hang on through the webinar, we're going to I'm going to give you some free gifts that are going to be very helpful in getting you started. We'll talk about that in a minute. At the lunch break, I'm going to give you access to our online program, which normally sells for $297. And I'm just going to give it to you. And it's a follow-on program to this. Now, I'm also going to give you my permission to share that. Now, normally we would never do that. In fact, we just decided to do that yesterday. I'm going to give you the link. You can copy the URL. I'm going to redirect your page at lunch. It'll take you there. You can sign up and get the entire follow-on course to this, the one that parallels it, absolutely free of charge. And if you've got friends or other people who are interested in real estate, I'm even going to let you share it with them. We're just going to give it away. Instead of charging $297 for it like we normally do, we just decided, hey, we'll just give it away to start the new year off right. But the reason we give away so much, frankly, is because while you can take the information we teach you, and a lot of you are going to learn plenty to get started. In fact, when we're done, you're going to know a lot more than I ever did starting out in real estate. But truth be told, is there's always a certain percentage of people who are going to want me to actually walk them through the process. So whilst many of you will be off on your own and doing well, that's great. Take what we teach you and invest in real estate. And we're extremely happy about that. There's plenty of room for other investors. But I also know a certain percentage of you are going to say, well, that's great. I've learned a lot, but I'd still would like to have Tom helping me out as we go forward, looking over my shoulder, making sure I don't make any mistakes, answering my questions on a daily basis if necessary. And those kinds of people will come back to us, and they actually do pay us. So we make our money by, frankly, giving away our material, because a certain percentage of the people that we give it away to actually do want to come back and have us train them, walk them through it, and work with them on an individual basis. And I'll talk to you about that a little bit at lunch and a little more at the end of the program. But and at the end of the program, what we're going to do for those who hang on to the program is, regardless of whether you sign up for coaching or not, I'm going to give you a free private consultation, a strategy call, if you will, to kind of give you an idea and help you direct you into your first investment property. So we're going to provide that absolutely free of charge. Once again, it's funny how giving things away seems to come back to us, and that's why we do it. Now, I've been involved in real estate for a long time. I started in 1987. I started by buying 2 duplexes from a World War II veteran. He passed a couple years ago, but he got me started. And what he said, this is 1987, he said, if you can come up with $5,000, I'll sell you 2 properties and I'll finance them as an owner financing. And we're going to talk about that in the program. And that got me kicked off. It was $5,000 at that point, ladies and gentlemen, was everything I had. I had to beg, borrow, and steal to get there to do it. But I bought the properties. They were in bad repair. I fixed them up personally. I learned a lot about fixing property in those buildings. And then when that was done, what I did is I sold them, and that really launched my career in real estate. So we love real estate. It's been good to us. I'm not going to kid you. There have been times when real estate's put us over its knee and spanked us pretty hard. We've learned some tough financial lessons, and we're going to share those with you as well, so you can hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls that we went through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my camera now, and I'm going to take us on to the training program screen, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I do have the chat box open. As I'm speaking, I'll try to respond to questions here and there as I can, but we'll also give you a chance, and we'll give you our support email where you can actually email questions, and I'll respond to those personally. What we decided to do on this program is to make sure that you're working with me privately and not with one of our other coaches. It's one of the benefits of our program today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera, and then we're going to go ahead and share my screen with you and get the program rolling. Okay, I am known as the 14-day investor, and the reason we are known as a 14-day investor is if you give me 14 days. Now, that's not 14 days where you work an hour or 2 here and there. This is 14 real days where you put in work. I can get you into your first investment property. Now, that doesn't need to be 14 days in a row. It doesn't need to be 14 full days. It can be half days and things like that. But think about this. If you put in 1 to 2 full days a month, in 6 months or so, you can have your first cash flowing investment property. And that's critical, because cash flowing investment property is what's going to secure you financially. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here in this first module. Now, we have 6 modules, and they're each about 45 minutes to an hour. And at the end of each, we're going to take about a 5-minute break. And that's just coffee, grab a water, use the restroom, whatever you need to do. But I do start on time, so we're going to get the ball rolling right away. So please don't be late. Lunch, we're going to break between 12:30 and 1 o'clock for a quick 30-minute lunch. So grab something, and then we're going to be off and running. And we'll be done about 4 o'clock Central Time, which is 5 o'clock East Coast, and about 2 o'clock West Coast time. We have people across all time zones. Also, if you'd like to share this, please do on your Facebook and Twitter and your LinkedIn pages. We love it when people share our materials. We're going to get you our free gifts here shortly, and the free gifts are going to be things like free real estate calculators, things of that nature, which we're going to get you here momentarily. Now, what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to shift back and forth between screens a little bit, so please do bear with me. The system isn't completely seamless, but it does work quite well. So we're going to get you those free gifts here in a little bit. Also, we're going to give you that additional training. We're going to give you access to the $297 program, not only for you, but for anybody else who might be interested. We think you're going to love that. It's a great follow-on. And the reason I'm doing it is so that you don't have to try to write down everything on the slideshow. That's critical. What I've always found difficult is I'm trying to listen, I'm trying to pay attention, I'm trying to think about what's being said, but at the same time, I'm trying to take notes, and it simply does not work out extremely well. So we're going to provide that for you so you don't have to worry about it. We're also going to do a couple pop-in surveys here and asking a few questions of you. And we're also going to open some other pages for you during training here so that I can direct you to a couple pages. For instance, one of the pages where we look for new properties, one of the pages where we actually have a free signups and things like that. So I will be moving back and forth a little bit between screens here. And what I'm going to do first off is I'm going to give you all the chance to go ahead and grab a copy of all of our free gifts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up it should pop in on the side of your screen, and it says free gifts for attendees, including profit calculator, lifestyle calculator, and ebooks. What that is it's an Excel spreadsheet, the profit calculator is, where it will help you analyze your deals. A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to figure out if they got a deal or not. And with the pop-in calculator, with this profit calculator, you'll know in about 3 minutes. So you don't want to waste time on a lot of deals that aren't going to actually work. So we're going to provide that. We're also including the lifestyle calculator. Now, the lifestyle calculator will go through and help you determine how much you're spending right now, where you might actually be able to find some extra cash in order to invest in real estate. And I'm also giving you copies of 2 of my ebooks right there. So please go ahead, and all you have to do is enter your name and email there, and that's going to be sent directly to your email. So that's something you want to take care of right now, and we'll be offering or putting other offers in there for you as we go. One second, ladies and gentlemen, we're just moving back to the other screen. All righty. So there's also a chat bar on the right, and we'll try to answer those questions as we go. And then our email is support@tommeetzel.com. And once again, I'll give that a little later down the road for questions and things of that nature. Now, what you're going to learn is we're going to talk a little bit about the mindset of an investor. We're going to talk about finding a property. We're going to talk about crunching the numbers, negotiating your deal, funding your property, and working with tenants. All those are critical, but you also need to protect yourself from expensive mistakes. And we're going to go through that in some detail. And by the end, you're going to know some of the things you shouldn't do. Real estate is one of those businesses that can really create a lifestyle for you. When I got started in real estate, I was actually in college. I bought my first property. I was still in college. And the reason I bought it is because in '87, when I was getting out of school, it's kind of like it was now. There wasn't a whole lot of jobs. College people, you're coming out of college, you weren't able to get much work. So I just decided to start out on my own. I had started actually a scuba diving company of all things in the Midwest. And it was one of the biggest teachers of new scuba students in the Midwest. And I enjoyed that. I was making a lot of cash, but I also recognized that if I was going to become wealthy and develop a lifestyle, I actually had to have cash coming in every month, whether I showed up or not. Because if you go to work and get a paycheck, you've got a job, you have no security. Members of my family have gone through 2-3 jobs during this last recession through no fault of their own. Companies just downsizing. So you need to put something in place that's going to actually provide for you in your future. How much, when you look at the average American has virtually nothing saved. The average American retires with less than $75,000 in the bank. Well, for heaven's sakes, that's 2 years of living expenses at best. We'll talk about Social Security here in a minute, but that certainly is not going to provide any kind of a lifestyle. So how long do you want to work? But let's take a look at government statistics and why I think real estate is so critical to your future. When you look at household debt currently, that's how much each household in America owes to pay off the debt. It's about $46,000. The average income in America is $46,000. The debt is actually $314,000. That's on what we currently owe. Well, heaven's sakes. But that doesn't include Medicare and Medicaid and all these other things we promised to pay. So it's equivalent to a person making $46,000 owing $2.4 million. Well, you tell me. I mean, how is this going to work out for you? I mean, at some point, it's going to get seriously ugly. Now, the nice thing is that everybody needs a roof over their head. So that's one of the things you got to love about real estate. Social Security and Medicare are broke. Social Security is paying out more now than it's taking in. In fact, when they took the money in, they spent it and put what they call an IOU, which is simply a bookkeeping item on your accounting spreadsheets, saying, well, we'll just take future taxes and pay this back. Well, so you've paid it once, it's been spent, now it's going to have to be paid again, but frankly, there's not the money there. So debt's accumulated at $27,000 per second. If you were to run a business this way or anything, you would go to prison as a Ponzi scheme. What I see, and I see this even in people I know very well, there's something called a normalcy bias. They think that because things have always been good, America's always been the #1 country, it's always been a great place, nothing as bad is going to happen. We don't have any issues. It's not going to be a problem. But I think that's relatively naive. And most people in America are relatively economically illiterate. And I don't mean that harshly. I simply mean that they're not trained in high school. They're not trained in college generally on how money actually works and how things actually flow business-wise. Most people, when they go to school, are taught to work for somebody else. And what's coming down the road in Social Security and Medicare is means testing, which means if you have money, you're probably going to be booted out of the system. Now, given the choice of making my own money and being booted out, as I think I'm going to be down the road, I'll take that versus suffering in poverty on Social Security and Medicare. The promises that the government have made simply won't be kept. Now, a lot of people invest in mutual funds and stocks, and I'm not telling you why to do it. But the problem, let's talk about mutual funds and stocks, and I've owned both. The problem with mutual funds and stocks is you're at the mercy of the fund manager. For instance, if you think the fund's not doing very well and you want them to do something different, it's not like you can call up the fund manager and say, hey, dude, I'd really like you to do something a little different. First off, you'll never get in, and second, you don't own enough of it to make any difference to them. And government rules can destroy your investments. Right now, I've got Roth IRAs, but there are the government has made some noises about actually eliminating Roth IRAs. They're realizing that, oh my gosh, that there's trillions of dollars in Roth IRAs, and they want to get their hands on it. So the government can change the rules, and you have no control. You also have no leverage. For instance, if you go to buy a bank stock, let's say you go to the bank, your local bank, and you say, I'd like to buy your stock and I'd like to borrow money to do it. They'd laugh in your face. They're not going to borrow you a dime to buy real estate or to buy their own stock, but they will borrow you anywhere from 80 to 96.5%, in some cases 100% to buy real estate. What does that tell you? There's also low diversification in individual stocks, meaning it's very hard in order to buy enough stock to have enough diversification that if one area of the stock market goes down, another area typically goes up. Now, the stock market is at a very high point right now, but those things can change, as I'm sure those of you who have been around a while have ridden through some of these downturns. And there's also low or no cash flow. Some stocks do pay some dividends, which is then taxed on top of that, but the dividends are usually pretty minimal, and most people don't own enough stock to make a difference. And then when things get rough, when the stock market drops, people sell. But what do? When they get enamored with the stock market, they think it continues to go up. Everybody's jumping in. They buy. Well, the institutional investors dump their stock and get out, and everybody who doesn't have an institutional investor is left holding the bag. And you sell your stock, so you buy high, you sell low, and people get hit pretty badly on that. Some people invest in precious metals, coins, arts, and commodities, but it's a very small niche, and it's difficult to leverage. Once again, it's very difficult to borrow against. Only a few people are involved in it. So you've got a very limited market, and those items are worth basically what somebody else is willing to pay for them. There's very little liquidity in that. They need to be stored and insured. And I've owned gold and I've owned silver. I had like 5,000 ounces of silver. And that's a pretty 5,000 ounces of silver, divide that by 16. That's a lot of weight. Well, you need multiple boxes to secure that, multiple bank boxes, and that gets to be quite expensive. There's also no cash flow. You have to sell it in order to make a return. And once again, most people buy high and sell low. Gold was trading, north of 1,700, I believe, not too long ago, and now it's down several $100s. Some predictions are it's going to drop as low as $400 again, but that time will tell. But once again, you've got no liquidity in that. And if you want to buy precious metal, try to go buy a car and take your gold coins. It's simply not going to happen. Now, the thing we love about real estate, and the thing we're going to talk about today, is that you control 100% with only a small down payment. And when you buy it right, which is what we're going to teach you today, your tenants pay for your property. Now, isn't that nice? You not only get all the upside appreciation, but somebody else is actually paying for it. And your monthly cash flow creates your standard of living. You can buy properties at cash flow $200 to $500, and think about that. How much are you making right now? The average American makes $46,000. Well, let's say you are cash flowing $400 a month on your properties. By the time you buy 10 properties, you're making more than you would than the average American would make it as a wage. So it's really a way to create a standard of living that is very difficult to match anywhere else. And people always need a roof over their head, overall needs. They're not going to sleep in their car generally. They'll stop making car payments. They'll stop going out to eat. They'll stop doing a lot of things, but they're not going to sleep in the street. Now, real estate has high to very high leverage. It allows you to borrow an enormous amount of money compared to other assets, and you keep all the upside. Think about that. The bank is going to borrow you money. Let's say it's a bank loan. Now, I'm not saying that's what we're going to talk about, alternatives financing, but let's say you borrow from a bank. Right now, the rates are under 4%. So you get to borrow the money at 4%. And let's say that property appreciates 2-3% a year. Well, the bank doesn't get any of that appreciation. You do. So as in real estate, you keep all the upside. You not only keep the free cash flow, but you keep all the upside, which can be significant. what you will find is that we've got people listening on the coast. We've got people in the Midwest. The coasts tend to cycle quite a bit faster. They go up faster, they come down faster than the Midwest does. The Midwest is a little more stable, but that's going to provide some opportunities for us to move our money around. So real estate lets you keep all the free cash flow. And the nice thing is banks, lenders, private money, everybody understands real estate very well, and you can directly impact your returns. And by that I mean, if you own coins or art or mutual funds, how are you going to actually impact the return on that? With real estate, what you can do is you can actually make changes to the property that will improve your cash flow on it, that'll improve your rent, that'll improve your value. You can, little things like paint, landscaping, all those types of things add value to your property that you normally wouldn't be able to achieve in another type of investment. And it's one of the only things that can pay you for the rest of your life. Now, I'm not here to blow smoke up your backside and tell you that buying real estate's easy. It's not. This is a work program. And if you think you're going to get rich quick and you're jumping from program to program and you're looking at all kinds of different alternatives, I've got the bad news for you is that in 10 years, you're going to be in the same spot. What you got to do is think about it, dig in, and get ready to actually make the commitment to buy property. If you buy one property a year for the next 10 years, just one property a year, you're set for the rest of your life if you do it right. And tell me what else you can do that's going to have that kind of impact on you. And also you can build a legacy. Think about this. I don't care what age you are, whether you're 20, 30, 50, 70. If you start buying property now, when you pass on, you can pass that along to your family and build a cash flowing legacy. Think about how that would impact your family's future. Now, with real estate, everyone starts in the same place. And as I was mentioning earlier, is you actually have to exercise some patience. Some people do get rich quick in real estate, but frankly, some of them who get rich quick also lose it in a hurry as well. So you have to be patient, work through the program, and actually go ahead and put the work in to buy it. And you have to learn the business. And you have to be willing to get rich slow. Now, by slow, I mean over 5 to 10 years. If you do it slow, you can do it in a year. But even if you're not working the program that aggressively, you can get rich and develop a cash flow that will replace your income over 5 to 10 years. And you must accept that you're going to make mistakes. Heck, I've made mistakes that have cost me millions. Not starting out. That's why we recommend starting with a small investment property first, which is what we're talking about, a 2 to a 4 unit property generally, because any mistakes you make are a whole lot easier to take care of than buying a 20 unit or a 50 unit and then finding out you made a big mistake. And the other thing you have to get out of is the perfection trap, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And also you have to have the desire. Desire is one of those things that you have to have in your heart. What is it that makes it important for you? Are you just sick and tired of being sick and tired? Do you want something better for yourself and for your family? I know I do. And you're going to have to be willing to suck it up and go through the adversities and challenges. And that comes down to what's inside you, what's inside your heart. Why do you have to have it? Why is it important to you in order to do it? And what are you willing to sacrifice? I'm not telling you that you don't have to go out and work in order to buy real estate. You're going to have to sacrifice some time, and maybe that's time with family as well. But those sacrifices will pay off in spades down the road when the kids go to college, when you retire, when you're able to pass on a legacy. So you have to be willing to sacrifice a little bit now in order to do the things you want to do later. And you've got to be willing to dream. So many of us have been beaten down over time that we're afraid to actually try. The other thing I see a lot of investors I coach and work with get into is the perfection trap. And that's easy to fall into because what it does is they say, well, I don't have this in line. I don't have my office set up. I don't have enough knowledge. But it keeps you from being hurt because if you have to be perfect before you do anything, you never have to do anything. And it protects your ego. It's always easier to say, well, I could have done that. I just didn't have the chance. The timing wasn't right. You can make all the excuses you want, but planning will only help you to a point. At some point, it's time to suck it up, stand up, and actually get out there and do it. And it's frightening. The first time you do it, it's going to be one of those days where you're shaking and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But those are the times that you know that you're making advancements. And some people plan to plan. I have friends who've been thinking about doing a business for 10 or 20 years. They've got business plans, and everything they learned all those years ago is obsolete. In fact, things change faster all the time. So at some point, you've just got to learn that life is messy, and you're going to have to learn to accept it and figure that you've got the knowledge and the ability to adjust to things as you go. I'm going to show you how to avoid all the big pitfalls, but little things will always come up. And those are the things that you're going to need to be willing to do and learn from your mistakes and go. And that goes back to learning, letting go of mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes. And, when you think about the human race, how many mistakes we've made just to get to the point where we are right now, it's got to be uncountable. We've all failed, and our mistakes keep us feeling bad and make us afraid to try. It's one of those things that it's like putting your hand on a stove. You're afraid to do it again. Well, I'm not saying to put your hand on a hot stove. I'm saying that turn the stove off and try again. But if you don't accept that you're going to make mistakes and you don't get past the point where you're going to have fear, but you're going to continue anyway, the fear can hold you back. You've got to look at yourself and look internally and determine where your strengths and your weaknesses are. There are certain things I'm great at and certain things I'm frankly quite awful at. And what I do is I try to, over time, I hire people to work on things that I'm weak in, and I work on my areas of strength. And my areas of strength are negotiating and working with clients and finding homes and putting deals together. My weakness is doing the paperwork. I've got accountants that work for me out of India. I've got assistants that actually work for me locally. So those are the types of things that you've got to understand that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to be fearful. And people use family as an excuse. I see this all the time. Well, I've got kids. I don't have time. I mean, I've got to do this. I got to do that. Well, you can use your kids and your family as an excuse why not to do something or why to do something. Which do you think they're going to appreciate more? Do they think you're going to appreciate you just sitting back or being able to provide and do things with them down the road? Real estate is a learn by doing program. And on that download that I opened up for you, you'll be able to go ahead and grab the free lifestyle calculator. And in that, it's going to go through what's in your expenses, it'll figure out what you have available to begin. And it's going to help you write down your whys. Why do you want to go through the trouble of achieving what you want? Frankly, there are other ways to make money. You can accept a job, and most people do. Probably 90% of people just accept a paycheck. But remember, at the end of the month, they give you a paycheck. You provide the service, they provide a paycheck. You're even. They have no loyalty to you. And whether they should or not is another discussion we're not going to get into. But the fact is, loyalty in the workplace is dead, and you must accept that. You must look out for yourself because no one else is going to. You're going to need to write down your dreams and write down your goals. And on the lifestyle design calculator, that's going to help you do that. So make sure that you grab that right away. Now we're going to talk about, the first thing we're going to talk about on real estate is self-protection. Now I know that sounds a little strange, but we live in a litigious world. The system's broken. People can sue you for anything. And it makes no sense whatsoever in my mind, but it happens. And you must protect yourself from the bloodsuckers. There are people out there who would rather take what you've earned rather than earn it for themselves. So you've got to vaccinate yourself against legal issues and structure yourself right from the part. So there are a number of different types of frameworks in which you can own property. So there are sole proprietors. We're going to talk about each of these in more detail. But there's sole proprietorship, C corporation, S corporation, general partnership, limited liability partnership, limited liability corporation, and trusts. Some are better than others. Some are horrible. Sole proprietorship, frankly, is horrible. And let me tell you why. A sole proprietorship is easy to finance, meaning this is all done in your name, ladies and gentlemen. There's no corporation structure. You just buy property in your name. And I've got a couple clients who still do that, and I've been warning them that one of these days somebody's going to come along and kick them in the teeth for their trouble. So you want to make sure that that you don't buy things as a sole proprietorship if you can all avoid it. But sole proprietorships are easy to file taxes. There's less paperwork, but here's the kicker. There's unlimited liability. With a corporation, which we're going to talk about momentarily, you've got some protection from lawsuit. But if you buy property as a sole proprietor and somebody slips and falls on your property, somebody tumbles down the steps, there's a problem, they can not only sue you for the property, they can sue you for everything else that you own. So all your other assets are at risk. That's the worst form of ownership. I highly recommend against it. Now, a C corporation, General Motors is a C corporation. Ford is a C corporation. Google is a C corporation. These are the big dogs, the big companies. Now, there are some real estate companies that are structured that way, and they do provide for limited liability, and individuals who own stock in the company are not responsible for the debts of the company, and there's no personal liability to the shareholders, meaning if something goes bad on a deal, if somebody gets hurt in a property, they can't come back and sue you individually. It does continue after your death. However, they are expensive to form and require an enormous amount of paperwork. One of the downsides is there's also double taxation, meaning the corporation, a C corporation, not all corporations, a C corporation is thought of as a person for entity purposes. So really the C corporation is thought of as a person, so it pays taxes. And then when you get the money out of the corporation, you pay taxes. That's why it's called double taxation. And if the company happens to lose any money, it doesn't offset any income on your personal returns. Now, a lot of people think, well, I can get all this personal liability protection, but the truth be told, having done this for a long time, the lenders won't lend without a personal guarantee, especially at a small C corps. I mean, are they asking the president of Google to personally guarantee loans? No. But if you as a small individual are investing in property, I guarantee you, they're going to want a personal guarantee, which kind of eliminates some of the security of a C corporation. Now, an S corporation is a C corporation that's just elected to be taxed differently. It's only taxed once. It's relatively inexpensive to maintain, but you do need to take a reasonable payroll check, which is subject to self-employment tax. Now, keep in mind, if you have a regular W-2 job, you only pay half of the Social Security and Medicare, which is about what, 7.65 your half total. So it's going to be about 15.5 plus when you pay both sides. So do keep in mind that when you're self-employed, it's called self-employment tax. It's going to be a little extra kick to the teeth. It was a surprise to me the first time I found that out. Now, an S Corp does provide you with liability protection. Now, when you're running corporations, one of the things you need to do is you do need to follow the rules about record keeping and things with corporations. What I find is people set up a corporation, an S Corp or one of the other forms we're going to talk about, and then figure they're set and they don't have to do anything else. And that's simply not the case. When you set up a corporation, you do need to do some paperwork. I actually have a company that does it for me, which keeps me legal. And for those people we coach, we pass you on to them too, and they can do it for you as well. But the thing about corporations is it doesn't require a whole lot of paperwork. It just requires a little bit of consistent paperwork. So keep in mind that even though a corporation can protect you, if you don't do the paperwork, and you get sued, the attorneys will do something called piercing the corporate veil, and they'll come after everything you have personally, just like it was a sole proprietorship. You'll also get a K-1 from the S Corp, which is a profit, income profit or profit income from the business, and that's not subject to self-employment tax. So I use S Corps in some things, and what I like to do is minimize the salary I take within reason. You can't pay yourself $10,000 and take $100,000 K-1. The IRS is not going to put up with that. And if you get audited, they're going to land on you like a ton of bricks. So your accountant can give you some guidance. Usually it's 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 between what you take as a salary and what you can take as a K-1. But it really depends on how conservative your accountant wants to be. And S corporations also going to require a personal guarantee on the loans. Now, general partnerships. Now, I know we're moving pretty quick here, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot of stuff we got to cover. That's why I'm going to give you at the lunch break a free copy of this entire program online. You can share with your friends. Everything's going to be on there. And that way you can just be paying attention now and not worrying about trying to digest and write down all the notes. General partnerships, I've been involved in a couple of them, and frankly, both have gone ugly, and they have cost me 6 figures to get out of. So general partnerships are easy to form, and they can have multiple general partners. But as a general partner, you have full control, but you also have full liability. And the kicker is, and this is the ugly part of it, this is what bit me in the backside, is you're responsible for the acts of the other general partners, not only civilly, but criminally. If they do something illegal, let's say you've got a general partner on a condo project and they go out and borrow $1 million, you knew nothing about it, you didn't sign for it, doesn't matter. They take the $1 million and abscond with it, guess what? You're personally liable for that. So general partnerships are one of those things that I do not recommend, especially starting out. If you do a general partnership and you don't know what you're doing, you are just asking to have your pockets picked and to be sued into bankruptcy. So do not do a general partnership unless you're extremely skilled and really do know what you're doing. Also, you have limited liability partnerships, which are a lot better than general partnerships. A limited liability partner has one general partner, and they assume all the risk. And your risk as a limited partner is limited to your investment. For instance, let's say you have a general partnership and there's 10 people that are going to buy a building, and you each put in $50,000. Well, the general partner is liable for anything that goes wrong on that project, If things were to go bad and you were to lose the property, you would be limited to your $50,000. Now, they are used extensively in real estate, and they are regulated by state law. So keep in mind that limited liability partnerships do vary. In fact, same with all these things. C Corps and S Corps are pretty standard, but limited liability companies, which we'll talk about next, and limited liability partnerships have different rules depending on the state. So you've got to be careful. The income is not double taxed. You do get a K-1, but you have limited control. In addition, it's difficult to get lending, and it's difficult to sell your shares, meaning the bank is going to want anybody who owns more than 10% of a partnership to personally guarantee the loan. Well, for heaven's sakes, you're buying as a limited liability partner, so you don't have to personally guarantee the loan. And it's much in trying to sell your shares. Many of these limited liability partnerships have restrictions on the ability to sell your shares, and it makes it very difficult to actually dispose of it. Limited liability corporations are what I recommend for most investors. They're easy to form. They're relatively inexpensive to keep up. The paperwork is not that onerous. There's fewer rules than a C or an S Corp, and the income is not double taxed. All members can be active in management, which is really nice. So you can assign responsibilities. In fact, you don't have to have a president or a vice president. You can have members, and each member can be actively involved in management. But once again, it has limited liability and limited resale. Now, a limited liability partnership requires at least 2 people to form. The nice thing about a limited liability corporation, an LLC, is that you can do it as one person, which is what I do on most of mine. And I do get involved with other people on certain deals, but I make sure that everything's negotiated up front, including the divorce. But the divorce from the partner or the corporation, the partnership. But the nice thing about corporations, LLCs, is that you can own them yourself and manage them yourself. The draws are not subject to FICA, although the profit in the LLC can be subject to FICA. And once again, you're going to have to personally guarantee a loan on it. Now, there are certain trust states. Trusts are available in almost all states, not every state, but almost every state. And it's a great way to own real estate by yourself. Now, this is not a personal trust. This is a real estate trust. There's a difference. It's a great way to own property. It provides a lot of shelter, and you can be both the beneficiary and trustee, meaning you're the person receiving the benefits from the property, and you're also the person managing it. There are 2 major states that do trusts, and that's Florida and Illinois. And most states that have trust laws do use one of those or the other as a template. The states that don't have specific trust laws generally allow them. And if it ever goes to court or there's any other legal issues, they generally look to other states that have them as far as what's going to be allowed or not. There's no complicated reporting, and you can manage the property of the trustee. But if you're not the trustee, you don't have full control, which means, let's say you're married and you make your spouse the trustee. If your spouse decides to sell the property, you don't have any say in it. It's simply going to happen if you give up control. So you want to maintain yourself as the beneficiary and the trustee. Now, some states don't allow you to be both. Then you have to have somebody like an attorney or something like that who will follow your directions in order to make sure that you're secure. They are a challenge to finance, but it's one of those things that can really get you some security and some privacy in the business realm. So what we're going to do now is, you can see here, we're rolling right along. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. And I want you to grab a glass of water. I want to make sure that you've gone ahead and all of you have grabbed the free gifts, the profit calculator and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and then we're going to start up again in 5 minutes. Now, I'm showing the time at 10:38. So actually, well, we're a little bit of ahead of schedule. I guess I'm talking faster than I planned on. So why don't we do this? Why don't we do one more module, and then we'll take a quick break and take a break at that point, because I covered that first one a little faster. I get excited sometimes. I love what I do. I love real estate. So sometimes I talk a mile a minute on that. So let's go ahead and just jump into the second one here. And we'll go ahead and pull that up here. And that's going to be the grub stake, financing your real estate purchase. And the real estate purchase can be done in a lot of different ways. And one of the things I highly recommend is that you owner occupy. And the reason I recommend you owner occupy your first investment property is it's easy to finance. Now, keep in mind, I realize some of you own your own home, and I'm going to check on that in just a second. In fact, let's do that right now. Let's do a quick poll here. I want to do this. Do you own your own home? And let's go ahead. If you could go ahead and check the box. Do you own your own home or not? It should be on your screen right now. Go ahead and vote if you would. Okay. What we're going to do here is we're going to end the poll. So 100%, not 100%, number of people who voted, but I guess it's about half and half, reading the numbers backwards there. About half and half own their own home, and the other half does not. All righty. So what we're going to do is let's check the, all righty. And what I want to do is ask how many of you have actually owned investment property before. I'm going to put that poll up there and see how many of you have actually owned investment property before. Because what I want to do as we go forward a little bit, I'm going to skew what I'm doing just a little bit, depending on how many of you have owned property before and where I actually need to put the focus. So if you can go ahead and vote on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to this other part here, and we'll come back and check that survey here in a minute. So when you own or finance, it's easy. I'm not apologize. When you own or occupy, it's easy to finance. Now, if you own your own home, you're going to be out of luck unless you're really willing to move. But I recommend, one of the techniques I recommend if you don't own your own property is to own or occupy your first investment property. And we're going to talk about that and why in just a minute. But one of the reasons you want to own or occupy is it's easy to finance. It's also low risk because you've got to live somewhere. And when you own a multifamily property, not only are you making a payment, but the tenants are also making payments, which offset what you have to pay to live there. You also can learn to manage tenants, learn to do property maintenance, and learn bookkeeping and financing. And frankly, people, it helps you determine if you actually like real estate investing. Not everybody likes it. I'm not going to kid you. I wish I could. I've worked with investors who've bought their first property and determined that it was not for them, and that's okay. But when you own or occupy, you've got a place to live. You can decide if you like investing. You can learn the rules you need to learn and determine if you want to buy more property. Now, if you own or occupy your first investment property or any investment property, here's a tip that you're really going to want to do. You definitely do not want to tell people you own the property. The reason is the second you tell them you own the property, they think you're rich, and you'll get all kinds of excuses about why they're not paying rent. And it's very tough to be hard on people, especially for people who are a little softer hearted, when people are, oh, I just don't have the money, I'll pay you in a month or something like that. If you get people who haven't paid you in 2 months, 90% of the time, you're not going to get a dime. So when you own or occupy, if people ask, you're the manager of the property. And then when somebody comes in and asks for, let's say, new carpet, you can say, well, I talked to them and say, well, let me check with the manager or the owner. So you can come back and say, well, I checked with the owner and they said if you make all your payments on time for the next year, we'll put in new carpet. Now that's assuming it needs new carpet. Or if they're going to be late on the rent, you can say, well, I talked to the owner and the owner said, we're going to have to get payment by the 5th of the month, or we've got to give you a notice to vacate the property. So what can we do to get the rent in on time? So that's critical. Owner occupying is great. That's how I started out. But do not tell people you own the property, because you will get every excuse in the book why they can't pay. Now, there are also 2 types of loans in general, and that's conforming versus non-conforming. Conforming loan meets all the government standards as to income and debt ratios. It's easier to finance, and the bank can sell it on the secondary market, which lenders like. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, the bank originates a loan, then they go ahead and sell that loan to a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, a quasi-government entity, and they're then allowed to do another loan. But if they have to keep that loan in-house because it doesn't meet the criteria, that ties up their working capital and it doesn't allow them to make as many loans. And that's called a non-conforming loan, which means it can't be sold on the secondary market and it has to be maintained in the bank's portfolio, which once again limits it, because generally the reserve ratio in a bank is about 10%. So if they have 10% of what they borrowed, they can go ahead and make another loan. For instance, $100,000, they can borrow $100,000. They may have to hold $10,000 in reserve, but they can make another $90,000 loan. So, and then they can make another $80,000 loan and so on down the ways. And what happens is that they can leverage 100,000 or a million many times over and have several $1 million of the loans paying interest. On a portfolio loan, that's simply not the case. Now, owner-occupied properties require much lower down payments, but they do need to be occupied for at least a year. I see people who own property saying, well, we're going to go ahead and just tell the bank we're going to owner-occupy. It's actually illegal to do that, and they're going to require you to sign a piece of paper stating that you're actually going to live there. And if you don't, you're really asking for them to come down and really lay it on you and can get you in all kinds of legal trouble. So don't be lying on this type of stuff. But owner-occupied properties, the paperwork's actually easy to understand, and it's easy to find realtors to assist you because they know what to do in that situation. When it becomes a little more tricky, that's when realtors become a little bit more problematic, and we're going to talk about that in more detail. Now, non-owner occupied properties require much higher down payments, meaning generally 20%. I've seen it as high as 30%. So that's why owner occupying your first property is a great deal. Now, the fact that you don't have 20 or 30% down, don't click off the webinar and say, oh my gosh, I can't do that. I'm just out of luck. We're going to talk about a lot of opportunities to do some non-traditional things. Now, non-owner occupied properties are more difficult to finance, and the lender looks at your personal finance and debt ratios. Now, if you have one property, that's sometimes fine. If you have multiple properties, what happens is that the income from the properties is not counted as heavily as the expenses from the company or from the property. So if you have income of $1,000 and the expenses are $800, the $800 is looked at much more heavily than the income. And I could teach a whole course on how that's actually calculated, but for purposes, just realize that by the time you buy one or two properties as an individual or a sole proprietor, which we don't recommend, you're pretty much out of luck. You won't be able to buy more. So that's why you've got to set up an LLC or some other type of corporation structure. And it's hard for self-employed people to qualify. Remember these liar loans that people were talking about all the time, these loans where, to give you an idea, we were grossing over $4 million and we were only showing income in the $50,000, $60,000 range because of all the legal deductions. And we're very careful. We follow all the rules. We follow everything. But with all the property we own and things like that and all the deductions, we didn't show a huge income. The problem with that is that if they're looking at you individually, they say, well, you don't make any money, when in reality, you make a lot of money. It's just run through the business. So that's critical to know that if you're self-employed, it's going to be a little bit harder to get any type of loan. The FHA is one of the loan programs that we recommend for self-employed people. And depending on the type of property you buy, it generally requires 3 to 5% down. Now think about that. You can buy a $200,000 property for for $15,000 to $20,000. Wow. Where else do you get that kind of deal? You can't do that with stocks. You can't do that with bonds. You can't do that with anything else. And it is government backed, but there is lots of paperwork on the FHA. And it does have to conform to all standards for the conforming loans, which once again can sometimes be hard to do. There are upfront fees and actually monthly fees for the life of the loan. And the monthly fees are for something called PMI, and we'll talk more about that, but that stands for private mortgage insurance. Now, if you're a vet like I am, the veteran loans are incredible. So VA loans are a little more flexible, and if you're a vet, I highly recommend you go ahead and check one of those out. You have to meet minimum requirements as far as service. It does require no down payment. But zero down doesn't mean no out of pocket. I mean, there's expenses for appraisals and other things so that you're going to have to come up with, and you are going to have to meet some income requirements. There's a lot of paperwork, and it takes longer to close than almost any other type of loan, but it is lower cost because it doesn't have the PMI for the life of the loan. Once you have sufficient equity in the property, it does allow you to opt out of the PMI, not opt out, but get out, I guess, and not pay it. Rural development loans, depending on where you live in the U.S., are very similar to the VA, and those are actually done by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, of all things. But it is similar to a VA loan in that it allows you to get in for zero down payment and minimal expenses. Now, traditional financing requires 5 to 20% down, and the paperwork is slightly less. Why? Because if you're putting 20% down, the bank typically feels that you're a better security risk. The less you put down, plan on the more paperwork you're going to need. With 20% down, it also doesn't require PMI, the private mortgage insurance, and we'll go into some detail on that momentarily. And the loan fees are less because it's not involving the government. Now, PMI is something I just detest. It's private mortgage insurance. You as a buyer pay it, but it protects the lender. It doesn't do a thing for you. And what it does is when you have PMI, it protects the lender for the first 20% of the loan. The reason you don't need 20% down or PMI if you have 20% down is that the bank feels that that 20% is sufficient cushion that if they get the property back, they will be able to sell it and get their money out and not lose any money. However, with less than 20%, they're less secure. So PMI is an insurance program that pays the difference between the 20% and what you put down. So if you put down 5%, the PMI covers that 15% spread. And it varies in price, but it can run, depending on the property, $100 to $300 a month. Now, on an FHA mortgage, you're going to pay that for the life of the loan, which really is unfortunate. Because what's going to happen is you get an FHA loan right now, it might be 3.5%, 4%. And down the road, when you've paid it down to 80%, where you only owe 80%, you'd like to get out of the PMI, but interest rates are 7 or 8%, you're pretty much going to be stuck because it's going to be cheaper to pay the PMI than to refinance and get out of it. However, with VA and conventional loans, once the property either appreciates or you've made payments for a period of time, you get off of this requirement to pay the PMI. And that's really nice. And the way you get it off your loan is what you do is you do one of two things. Either you go ahead and have it reappraised and show the bank that you've got an 80-20 value, or after a certain period of time, it automatically falls off. But remember, you can avoid PMI simply by putting 20% down. Now, I know a lot of you on the call, on the webinar here, are not in that position. So we're just going to have to work around it, which is fine. So the different places where you can do conventional investor financing, this is what you'd call normal, is bank lending. Generally, if it's non-owner occupied, it's going to require the 20, 30% down. It's going to be based on your personal credit unless you have a company track record. Now, going back to our corporations, if you have a corporation and it's been in existence for a year or so and you've been running your business like a business, not like a hobby, and you're showing all the money going into the corporation and the expenses going out, they're going to look at the profit from the corporation. So let's say you make $20,000 in income, you have $15,000 in expenses on your first property. You've got $5,000 in profit. The bank's going to look at that and go, oh, they've got a profitable business. And that's what they're going to look at when it comes to borrowing you more money. So the bankers are looking at your cash down, your experience, and your knowledge. One of the reasons that it's nice to start out in small properties or to own or occupy is that the bank doesn't really care that much about your experience or knowledge in multifamily property. If you go to buy a 20 unit or a 50 unit, they're going to want to know what you've done before. It's kind of that old chicken or the egg. You've actually got to have some experience before somebody's going to give you money to buy a bigger property. A lot of people say, well, just go buy the bigger property, buy the bigger property. I'm going, well, yeah, the rules are fairly similar in many ways, but the problem is it's much more challenging to do. Bank money is the cheapest money you're ever going to find. But there are alternatives to cash. And let's talk about that. And we're going to talk about this at a little bit of length here. Owner financing, hard money lenders, partners, your IRA, your 401k, which is something I really love to use, life insurance, and credit cards. Let's talk about each of those a little bit in turn here. The land contract, it's also called contract for deed in some states. That is basically where the owner acts as the bank. And that's how I actually got started with my friend, my old World War II buddy who financed my property. He said if you put, he charged me $40,000 for 2 duplexes, two units, and I put $5,000 down and he carried the loan for 5 years. So owner financing is generally difficult to convince most owners. And it's one of those things that if you have no money, this is how you're going to have to put your nose to the grindstone and actually tough it out and go ahead and say, look, I'm going to have to kiss a lot of frogs, talk to a lot of people in order to get a deal. The way to approach people on a land contract is they need to understand the financial benefit. And what I always like to do is once I get to know them a little bit, I'll say, well, when you sell, what are you going to do with the money? You're going on a vacation? You're going to stick it in the bank? Well, most will say, well, they're going to stick it in your bank. And I'm going, well, really, what's your bank account paying right now? I know mine's not paying much, less than 1%. And they go, oh God, it's horrible. I don't know, where I'm going to get some interest. So what I'm trying to do is set the tone so that I can come back and say, well, look, I can provide an alternative to you where you're going to earn 4 or 5, 6, whatever percent on your money, several times what you'd make in the bank. And that we'll get to that in a second, but I'm trying to find out in advance what they're going to do with the money so that, and some people won't tell you, some will, but it just becomes a situation where you've got to talk to people, you've got to get them to like you and relax around you. With a land contract or a contract for deed, if the owner likes you and decides to do it, that's the extent of the qualification. There's no appraisal, there's no banks, there's nothing. So I love this type of financing, but it's a little more challenging to get. Now, land contracts or contract for deeds, the financing term can be short or long term. If you borrow money for an owner-occupied property, let's say a 4-unit you're going to live in, you'll get a 30-year fixed rate on your loan. However, with a land contract, you might only get 3 years or 5 years. I've never seen a 30-year land contract, but the whole key is if you can get a 3-year or a 5-year commitment from the owner to finance, and you work the property, you improve the property, you improve the cash flow. In 3 to 5 years, if you're running it like a business, you can go to any lender and get a loan on that property. Now, the interest is usually going to be higher than the bank because than a bank loan. A bank loan might be 4 or 5%. You're going to have to pay 1 to 3% higher than a bank would charge you to borrow you money, generally speaking, to get a owner to be interested. Because if I come back to the owner and I say, well, look, you're making half of 1% in your bank account, I'll pay you 5.5%. They're going, that's, and it's secured by the property. It's a good way to start with no money, but you need to ask lots of sellers. Now, there is something called a due on sale clause. A lot of the properties you're going to see, believe it or not, a lot of properties in America are paid off. Now, if it is not paid off, there's in the paperwork, in the loan, something called a due on sales clause, meaning that if the property's transferred, whether it be in a traditional sale or a land contract, the owner is supposed to pay off the mortgage. And it began in the 70s because what was happening was that, if you remember, well, some of you are old enough, some of you probably aren't, in the 70s, interest rates were, in the late 70s, up to 18% for a home loan. Think about that. And earlier in the 60s and 70s, these rates were much lower, 5, 6%. Well, people were transferring their loans to new buyers, and the banks weren't able to capitalize on all the additional interest. So the banks lobbied Congress and convinced them to basically not outlaw that, but allow them to put in a due on sale clause, and that allows them to then jack up the interest rates if they want. Now, when there's a due on sale clause, if you buy a property from an owner that has an underlying loan and the bank finds out, the bank can call the loan, meaning they can force the owner to pay off the loan, which means you could be out of the deal, and anything you put down or any money you put in the property could be lost. But it is not illegal. There's no jail. There's no due on sale jail. There's no due on sale prison. But there is some financial risk. And when we start doing land contracts where we've got underlying notes and things, there are some techniques we can use, but you generally do want to involve the services of a real estate attorney. Now, when we're talking about attorneys today, what we're talking about is real estate attorneys, meaning you do not go to a general attorney, you do not go to a estate attorney, different things like that, to work with you on real estate. It'd be like going to a podiatrist to give you a, for your heart surgery. It just makes no sense. People think the law is the law, but there's different areas of the law, and you've got to have an expert in that particular area if you don't want to get in trouble. I learned that the hard way too. You've got to have somebody who knows the business, because first off, you want to make sure they understand what's going on. And second, you don't want to pay them hundreds of dollars an hour in some case in order for them to learn how to do it on your nickel. Now, how does a bank find out that a property is actually transferred ownership? There's generally 3 ways. First off, there's a change on the deed. When you change the deed, and that's recorded at the recorder at the county typically where you reside. So it's either the change on the deed, although generally they don't find out that way because they have to go down and actually research it. There's also, though, this the way they usually find out is it's a change of beneficiary on the insurance contract, because as the new owner, you have to insure the property, and that creates a new insurance form where they see that the property's been transferred. And that's generally how they find out. Or there's a different name on the check for the home payment. Now, keep in mind that the checks for these home payments are processed by low-paid clerical workers, so the odds of the bank finding out that way are pretty simple. They just stick it in the bank and call it a day. So you can avoid triggering a due on sale clause by the use of a land trust. Now, once again, this involves some legal maneuvering, and this requires a real estate attorney. But basically what a seller does is they sign a trust agreement with you as a trustee of the trust, meaning you're in charge of his trust, and the seller is named as the beneficiary, meaning they get the cash flow off the property. Then the seller transfers the title to the trustee, and there's no violation of the clause in this. And the seller quietly assigns his interest under the trust to you. It's similar to a transfer of stock in a corporation. And the assignment's not recorded in any public record, and the seller moves out and you move in. But because it is tricky, you do want to have an attorney involved on this. Now keep in mind, if the property is paid off, none of this applies. None of this applies. Now, the due on sale clause reads, the assignment of seller's interest under the trust, the assignment of the seller's interest under the trust does not trigger the due on sale clause, the assignment of seller's interest under the trust does trigger the due on sale clause, meaning technically when you transfer it via a trust, it does trigger the due on sale clause, but the lender doesn't find out, because what happens is when the seller creates the trust, the property is insured in the trust's name, which means the insurance policy doesn't change when the beneficiary of the trust is changed. But it does require a skilled real estate attorney. And I know that's a little confusing, so please keep in mind that it's just an option. And it's one of those things that we'll refer you to a good trust attorney if you're coaching with us in order to make sure it's done right. Now, there is a lot of other places to get money. One is hard money investors. Now, hard money investors are similar to private investors. The difference being a private investor is more of a long-term investor. A hard money investor is more of a fix and flip kind of thing. And hard money people normally want to invest for less than a year, and they're going to charge you points up front, 2 to 10% of the loan. And it's going to be high interest, anywhere from 8 on the low side to I've seen as high as 18%. It's generally good for flips and fix and flips, which is not something we do. We're normally a buy and holder, but it is important that there are hard money lenders available, but they're only going to borrow you 50 to 70% of the property value. So that means you've either got to buy it way under value or you've got to put some money into it. So it's, once again, best for flips and fixes, fix and flips, but it can be used for short-term money if you have longer-term money coming in. Now, a general lender, let's go back a second here. A private investor, on the other hand, is going to be someone who looks long-term, generally 3 to 5 years. What they're looking for is generally a better return on their money than they're getting in the bank, and they're going to secure it with the property. Normally, it doesn't require personal guarantees, although that's all part of the negotiation. Some will, some won't. So another way to put up money or to find money is to get partners. And they put up the down payment or sign the bank note. But that does make them liable. Now, as we talked about before in a limited liability partnership, the bank requires everybody owning more than 10% to sign the note, which makes it a little tricky to get partners involved, because if you only own 10% of something, do you want to be 100% liable? And that's generally not the case. So what I do when I use partners is I only take one partner per note, because if you take multiple partners, you're now triggering security laws, and that gets to be a whole nother can of worms. Just keep that in mind. If you're looking at bringing out multiple partners, that's another whole course on how to do to get around, not get around, but how to comply with the security laws. So what I normally do is I find higher net worth individuals who are making very low returns in bank accounts or in their IRAs, and we offer them a much better rate of return and use one lender on it so that they own the note. They're basically the first mortgagee, just like a bank. And if we were not to pay them, that they could actually go ahead and foreclose the property and keep it. So partners generally get a piece of the deal. It's negotiated. Everyone on a bank note is joint and severally liable. So if anybody owns enough property, enough of that deal where the bank requires them to sign on the note and the property goes into foreclosure, they can come after everybody. We were in a situation like this once where people defaulted and they came after the people who were minority partners in the deal because it was a general partnership in order to get their money back. So it's one of those things you've got to be a little bit careful of. And we counsel people as we go through on what to do and what not to do. But partners can help you gain experience, can help you earn the cash. And over time, you earn enough cash so that you've got the down payment so that you don't need partners. So it's one of those businesses, as I mentioned, that requires patience and requires time to actually develop. And partners can be a good or bad experience. I've had great partnerships and I've had partnerships that have just turned seriously ugly. So what I always do is say, negotiate everything, including the divorce while you're still in love. Meaning, go ahead and make sure that if one partner wants out of the deal or if things aren't going well, how the partnership is separated. And make sure you do that on the front side, because when people are going into a deal, they're much more reasonable. And if you don't have it, people tend to get very unreasonable when there's a lot of money at stake. So negotiate your exit strategy in the process of negotiating any partnership. Now, IRAs are seriously cool, and most of you have them. Now, if you have a company IRA or 401k, we'll talk about that in a second, but if you have a personal IRA, you can convert it. Most people think they can only invest in stocks or bonds or things like that. You can actually convert your IRA to something called self-directed, which means that you can use your IRA to buy a lot of different things. In this case, property. And you can convert a regular or a Roth IRA to self-directed. Now, there are some rules, and we can introduce you to the right people if you want to do that. But if you've got $100,000 in your IRA, there's no reason you can't use that money to buy property. Now, there are a few rules, and just in general, if you have a property bought through your self-directed IRA, you cannot live in the property and you can't rent the property to relatives. And literally, you cannot do any work on the property. You've actually got to pay somebody to do that. And you cannot guarantee any loan on the property. Now, that gets to be a little tricky, but we do have access to a couple lenders that will actually underwrite IRA loans. Now, generally, they're going to require 20% down on that. But if you have that kind of money in your IRA, it is an incredible good way to go. And all money, all income after expenses has to go back to your IRA. And there is something, let's say you use your IRA to put 20% down on your property and you borrow 80%. Well, 80% of your gains are going to then be subject to what they call UBITA tax. It's unrelated business income tax is what it's called. And it's a whole complicated formula, which your accountant can walk you through. It's not taxed on 100% of the gains. It's on a percentage. But frankly, you're better off to borrow some money and pay the UBITA than you are to put 100% down on a deal. Because when you think about it, if you had $100,000 and you had to put $20,000 down on each property, you could technically buy 5 properties and borrow the rest. Well, or 1 property. Well, you can look very quickly and see that owning 5 properties and the income off of 5 properties are going to be far superior, even paying a small amount of tax. Now, one of the things I highly recommend is if you have a 401k, you can often borrow for personal residences up to 4 units. So if you've got money in your 401k, you can really literally borrow from yourself, and it's easy to get the financing. Now, the 401k charges you interest, but guess what? That's money you're paying yourself interest. So what do you care what the interest charge is? It's coming back to you anyway. And the terms of the 401k loan and the length depend on the plan, but it can often be used for the down payment, not just the full. You don't have to necessarily buy the whole property. So you can use it for the down payment. The cool thing is, once the loan is paid back, you may be able to repeat the process, but that requires you having some knowledge and knowing what the rules and regulations are on your individual 401k. So you need to work with your administrator, because you really don't want to tell your administrator, well, here's my plan. I'm going to buy one. I'm going to live in it for a year, pay back the down payment, and then I'm going to go ahead and buy another one. I'm going to use my 401k to leverage myself into a lot of property. Generally, they're not going to allow that. So what you got to do is, go in, just buy your first property, your first investment property. You're going to have to live in it. And when you get the down payment paid off back to your 401k, then you can go back and say, well, I want to buy a new property. You don't have to mention you're going to hold the other one or keep the other one. You can go back, well, I'm going to buy another property. I'd like to take another 401k loan. And in many cases, they'll allow you to do it. And you can actually start buying multiple properties that way.
Another place where we find money is cash value life insurance. Many of you have whole life or universal life insurance. Term does not qualify. If you have term insurance, this section is not going to be right for you. But under cash value, what you can do is you can borrow the cash value out of your life insurance policy. In fact, I've done that in order to give myself a personal loan to buy some property. And once again, just like the 401k, you pay yourself back the interest, which is incredible. Think about that. You're not only you're borrowing your own money, and you're able to put more money back in, meaning you're improving your financial situation. No banks involved. The paperwork is minimal. It is a slick way to actually start getting into property, and it's great to use for the down payment. And also, it doesn't show up on your personal credit. A lot of things will. You borrow money from the bank, it's going to show up on your personal credit. You borrow from a personal investor, in many cases, it's going to show up on your personal credit. Same with hard money. But when you're borrowing from your 401k or your cash value life insurance, it doesn't show up on your credit, which doesn't impact your ability to get a loan or borrow other money for more property. So it's quick, it's easy, and it is great for getting into your first property. But be very careful not to lapse coverage. Remember, you've got life insurance to protect those you love in the unlikely event you die prematurely. So the last thing you want to do is pull all the cash out of your life insurance policy, have the life insurance lapse, which means you have no insurance coverage, and then you get hit by a truck. Now your family has nothing. They'll have the property, but once again, that's not what they're going to need in order to survive and thrive going forward without you. So if you die and you have a loan on your cash value life insurance, what happens is the amount you borrow is deducted from your life insurance. So let's say you you pulled $20,000 in cash out of your life insurance policy, and you have a $200,000 policy. If you die, that $20,000 is subtracted, and they pay you $180,000. So just be aware of that. But it is still a great deal. But do not lapse your coverage. Now, years ago, credit cards used to be a way I'd finance deals. I had 50, 60,000 in credit cards, and I'd do cash advances and rack them up and buy the property, fix it up, raise the value, get a new appraisal, and then I'd go ahead and go to the bank and get a loan and pay off the credit cards. That is pretty much kind of went by the wayside, and it is extremely risky because you're playing with money at anywhere from 12 to 24%, depending on your state and your credit history. So those kind of things can come back to bite you in the backside extremely bad. So you need to have a plan to repay it. But really what's happening now is I haven't been very successful with this technique right now because banks now do a credit check prior to closing, meaning they do a credit check if you're doing a traditional loan. Now, if you're doing a hard money loan or a private investor loan, you can do this. But if you're using a bank, the bank now will pull a credit bureau on you when they go ahead and start processing your loan. And just before you close, they'll do another credit check on you just to make sure you haven't pulled something like this, because the rules have gotten a lot more sticky. And any new debt on your credit report with a bank can delay or even stop your closing. So you got to be careful with that. Now, when you buy property, the values are based on location. And I always say it's location, location, location. If you have a great property in a bad neighborhood, and we're going to talk about that, it makes it much tougher to rent out. So values are based on location, and what you pay is going to be based on the property quality, the property amenities. Where is the shopping? People like to locate somewhere near grocery stores, somewhere near entertainment centers. Those are the properties that are best to have because people don't have to drive a long way. If your target market is going to be people with children, and if you're buying multifamily with 2 or 3 bedrooms, in many cases there's going to be kids involved. You want to make sure that the schools are good and that the crime rate's low. If you buy in areas with high crime rates, your turnover is going to be a lot higher. Your management costs are going to be a lot higher, and your management is going to be a lot more expensive. So in better areas, you're going to have a lot easier time managing it. And your tenant mix is going to differ from location to location because people stratify themselves economically, meaning people who make $100,000 don't live with people making $15,000 or people on Section 8 housing, which is government assistance. So people stratify themselves based on their income. So keep that in mind, that the more the higher end tenant that you're pursuing, the more it's going to cost to actually buy it. And that gets us into the types of neighborhoods that I classify properties under. And I classify properties as A, B, C, or D, just like a grade in school. I've seen some F properties, but those are just things that certain areas where if you can't get killed there, you're not trying. And those are areas you want to stay out of. We do have properties and have had properties in all types, A through D neighborhoods. In fact, we even own some in D right now. But your A neighborhoods are those higher end neighborhoods where people aspire to be. It's where you see well cared for homes, well manicured landscaping, and clean streets. You don't see trash everywhere. You see nice cars. These are, higher end domestics, higher end foreign cars. You don't see the old beat up cars unless they're the cars for the kids. You see a strong police presence. You see police coming through there. You see people out walking. There's a sense of community that makes you feel like, wow, this is a place I'd actually like to live. What you see, the way to tell if you're in an A neighborhood is, first off, if in your area, you probably know where the rich people live. Those are your A neighborhoods. That's just the easiest way to look at it, is where do the rich live? That's your A neighborhoods. Those are newer properties. The investment properties are going to be expensive, but they're generally well maintained. There's generally almost no deferred maintenance, because when you're working with an A tenant, they actually are high income and they expect a quality property. They don't expect to live in trash. They don't expect to live with torn carpet. They don't expect the hallways not to be clean. They expect that to be done. But your high income tenants pay rent on time and expect prompt attention. And in many cases, in the bigger projects, especially A projects, you'll see pools, tennis courts, and clubhouses. Now, you don't see that obviously in a 2 to 4 unit. Generally, you're not going to see a pool or any of those types of things. And if there were, it's not something you want to buy anyway, because you definitely don't want to pay to maintain it. Now, the problem with A properties is the cash flow. It's usually difficult to cash flow it. The people who buy A investment properties are generally pretty rich, and they're just looking for a better return on their money than they're going to see in a bank. And they really don't care too much about the cash flow so long as it's positive and the property requires minimal maintenance. And that is not an area where most of us are going to be able to invest. And if you look here right now, you'll see some of the A type of properties that you actually will see out there. They're quality properties. They're places that you would really love to live. And an A property in one area might be a B or a C property in another neighborhood. I mean, you go to some places in Los Angeles or New York, the A properties or the C properties might be considered an A property in the Midwest. So you should know, based on where you live, where the rich live, and suffice to say that those are the properties that are going to be your A properties. Now, B properties are for the up-and-comers. And the up-and-comers are going to have well cared for homes. There's a sense of pride. These are the neighborhoods for professionals, our high-end blue-collar people, or management, lower middle level management, government workers, things like that. Those are the B neighborhoods. You're going to find good schools because these people generally have quite a few kids. You're going to see nice cars, clean streets and properties. You're going to see people out mowing their lawns. You're going to see people painting, doing different things on their property. The exteriors are going to be vinyl or aluminum, sometimes stucco, and they're going to be upscale apartment complexes. This is where you're going to find your apartment complexes. And in your B neighborhoods, you're going to find your apartment complexes generally along the busy roads. What they do is the city has used the apartment complexes basically as a buffer for the single family. So your multifamily units, anywhere from 2 units on up, it can be, a 20, 50, 40, and 100 unit property. Those are all generally going to be along your main drags. But in most B neighborhoods right now, you're going to find 2 units and 4 units. You're not going to find the big properties anymore that you used to see in the past. Those tend to be clustered now in certain multifamily areas. The B neighborhoods are going to have a feeling of comfort, community, pride. It's going to be it's going to be the place where you'd say, I'd live here, and I wouldn't be, I'd be happy to walk the streets at night. And the buildings tend to be less than 20 years old. Now, occasionally you'll see some deferred maintenance, because when you get to be 20 years out, sometimes it needs new windows. Sometimes you get into the point where it needs a new roof, or the lawn needs to be reseeded, things like that. But it is the neighborhood of choice for those moving up, people who aspire to something better for themselves and their family. The properties are on thoroughfares, and these are good quality tenants. These are people who move up, who are making good money generally, who simply, in many cases, don't want to own. ownership rates in America are actually dropping. And for landlords, that's actually great news. And you're going to see in these B neighborhoods higher rents and purchase prices. And if you can make the numbers work, those are the places that you actually want to buy, B neighborhoods. Although most of us are going to start in C neighborhoods, which we're going to cover next. So just a picture of some of the properties that you're actually going to see in the B neighborhoods. Now, C neighborhoods is where I start investing. It's still where I invest mostly and where most people invest. And these are mostly blue collar or lower level white collar workers. And what you find is these neighborhoods tend to be older, and you'll see the multifamily interspaced with single family, which is actually good for you as a landlord because it creates more of a sense of community. When you get these major apartment complexes and stuff, there's a lot more transition because it's not as neighborly. People don't develop the relationships that they develop in these types of neighborhoods. So you're going to find that the C neighborhoods are a great place. Now, you will find that tenants have mixed credit. We sometimes rent to people who've had bankruptcy. We do charge them we do charge much more as far as asking them to put several months up front, things like that. But you're going to find tenants with great credit, tenants with marginal credit. Generally, most of the credit people in C neighborhoods are going to have what I would call reasonable credit, meaning 600, 650 credit scores and above. And you're going to see homes that are beautiful with gorgeous landscaping next to homes that frankly need some attention. You'll find these neighborhoods have lots of kids around, and that's great because these are the kinds of neighborhoods when people drive in and think about renting, they want somebody for their kids to play with. They want a place where you can actually feel comfortable and safe. You will on occasion see some tagging, some trash laying around, but generally it doesn't hang around long and it gets picked up. And C neighborhoods, the thing to be aware of is they can be improving or becoming worse. You want to look around and find a C neighborhood that's been improving, that's looking like people are updating their homes, there's work being done. Because in a C neighborhood, neighborhoods don't remain static. They either improve or go downhill over time. So in C neighborhoods especially, you don't want to buy something next to a D area where it's sliding down into disrepair. You want to buy in a C neighborhood that's abutting a B or an A neighborhood, and that it's an up and coming. It's where people who can't afford a better neighborhood want to be, and there's a sense of pride and sense of ownership. So you're going to see old properties in C properties, not always the really old. Sometimes you'll see C neighborhoods will have properties hundreds of years old, depending on what part of the country you're in. If you're in out west, you don't see the properties that old. If you're on the East Coast, you can see C properties that are 100, 200 years old. Same in the Midwest. So you're going to see a lot of variety. But these are the properties that are more affordable for you to buy. And there's a mix of good and bad properties for investment. And when you buy older properties, you do need to know that there are going to be some things you got to watch. And we're going to go through inspections this afternoon and how to actually inspect the property. But what you need to be aware of in older properties is you need to be looking at them mechanically, how much it's going to cost to improve them, and you want to make it clean and safe. What I see people doing is that, remember, the property you're buying is not, if it's a property you're going to live in, great. But remember, who is going to be renting from you? I have properties in rougher neighborhoods, and these are not properties I would personally live in, but the tenants, we provide a clean, nice home. It's not something that I think is anything, special, and not something I'd want to live in, but they consider it nice. So you want to improve your property to the point, make it clean and safe, and make sure that you don't over improve it. You want to know who your tenant is and what you're going to need to do in order to make them happy. So on the screen, you'll see some simple C properties, some of which we've been involved in. Now, D neighborhoods, these are really your war zones. I own some property in different areas that honestly, I'm fine there during the day, but it's not something that I really like to go to at night. The reason we own there is the cash flow is incredible, but there is lots of crime. You're going to see tagging and gang activity. There's a sense of fear at many cases. There's a significant crime problem, and the people who live there typically don't have a lot of options. But because of the neighborhoods, you can actually make some pretty good money. We've got properties cash flowing 20 to 30% in the D neighborhoods, but it does require an awful lot of more management. There's a lot of turnover, things like that. Your D neighborhoods generally don't have any sense of community. The The schools are bad. It's not someplace you'd want to send your kids or the kids of friends of yours. But it's one of those situations where people need a place to live. You're going to find that people are on government assistance. In D neighborhoods, ladies and gentlemen, are not for beginners. This is not someplace you want to start out in. It's not someplace that we started out in. We had to learn a lot of lessons, and every day we seem to learn new lessons in real estate. So D properties are interesting, but it's not something I'd recommend for you at this point. But I do want you to realize that they are available. Management of these D properties is much more difficult. Our tenants in our D properties don't have checking accounts. Most of them have bad credit or very marginal credit, which means we actually have to send collectors down into the neighborhoods to actually get cash. We've had people, our collectors steal cash. We've had a lot of challenges over the years. We've still made great money, but it's not something I'm going to recommend. But it is a place where you can find cheap property, but there's also a lot of deferred maintenance and a little sense of pride. Now, one of the things that we were found out the hard way is some of these cities have neighborhood services. And when you buy a property as an investor, some of these cities, believe it or not, will come in and inspect the property and require you to make a ton of improvements. They're trying to improve the inner cities. Well, that's great. They don't always require it if somebody's going to own or occupy, but if you as an investor have to do that, that's something to be aware of. We bought into a property, we were not aware of it, and the city came in and required us to make repairs at about 20% of the value of the property. The numbers still work, but the first year we made no money on that property. We had to put everything we made back into that property. So be aware that in some of these inner city areas, there are certain zones that they require you to make improvements when the property is transferred. So be sure to check on that before you buy in these particular areas. You're also going to see poorly maintained lots and building code violations, everything from railings not attached to peeling paint to windows broken out. So these are areas, like I said, that are pretty blighted, and they're generally found in inner cities or downtowns. And I would not recommend buying these, especially starting out. There's no amenities. What you see is there's no large chains. One of the ways when you drive into a D neighborhood, most people can recognize it for what it is. One of the signs of a D area is there's no large chains. You don't find a Walmart. You don't find a Target. You don't find a Lowe's or a Menards or any of these. What you find are mini marts, check cashing stores, rent to own, people who cater to a lower income clientele. So stay out of D areas until you're really ready to start making some more high cash flowing investments that are a little bit riskier. So let's do this. What I want to do now is we are actually going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. I'm going to turn on my camera here for you. Alrighty. So hope you're enjoying it so far. What we're going to do is we're going to take a short 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and jump right back in. And I hope you are enjoying what you're learning. We are moving pretty quick. Do keep in mind that after the next module, I'm going to pop up a screen for you. It's going to open on a new window for you on your browser, and it's going to allow you to grab our free online course, which parallels this course, absolutely free of charge. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. I'm showing the time at 11:27. So we're going to kick off again, let's say at 11:33. So I will see you then, and we'll get started again.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start promptly, just like I promised. I do want to answer a couple questions that people had. People are asking, okay, they have one saying, I don't have much problem finding financing, but I'm having problems finding properties. And what that comes down to is that if you're having problems finding properties, there are some techniques that you can use. One of the things we do is we'll actually do direct mailings into people, trying to get the properties before they actually are listed. We do things, we have relationships with attorneys who do estate sales and things of that nature. And that's more, we can't go into all the different, don't have time to go into all of it today, but suffice to say that what you need to do is if you're having problems finding properties that actually cash flow, it's because by the time they hit the MLS or the market, they're actually priced at market. And in many cases, there's not a lot of cash flow there. So one of the things we teach in the coaching program is some of the alternatives as far as getting at the people before they actually make a decision to list the property or get it up on the MLS or something like that. Because in many cases, once it gets there, it's a little harder to cash flow, but it comes down to being able or willing to buy out of your area a little bit. Stoughton, this particular question came from Stoughton, Wisconsin, is actually one of those areas that isn't too bad. And we can work with you down there and show you some of the properties that are generally available. This in Wisconsin, where Stoughton is located, the market is really soft in the winters. There's not a lot being listed, but come spring, there's going to be things. But in that particular market, I know it, you're generally looking at returns of 7 to 12% returns, which we're going to be talking about, which isn't bad when you think that you're making very little in your bank account. But that's one question. Had a couple people who were having a little trouble seeing the screen. You should be seeing our slides as we go through. If not, go ahead and log out and try logging back in, and that should hopefully help. But do keep in mind that at the end of this next session here, I'm going to give you access to the online course, which has all these slides and it's completely done for you. So you won't have to worry. Just pay attention and take notes as you go here, and that'll supplement it for you so you won't have to worry. So what we're going to do is we're going to share our screen again here and get the ball rolling on Module 3. At the end of Module 3, I am going to open a browser on your computer. Hopefully that works the way it's supposed to, and give you access to our course free of charge. And then we're going to take a short lunch break after this so everybody can grab a little bite to eat. And then we're going to jump into the afternoon material, which is critical to your success because it's going to include things like inspections and what to look for. We've got pictures and things like that of good thing, or mostly of bad things, frankly. Good is good, bad you got to be able to recognize. So we're going to go ahead and share our screen again here and get the ball rolling on our next module. Whoops, sorry there, ladies and gentlemen, that's the wrong one. Gotta grab Module 3 here. There we go. How to profit in any real estate market. Now we're in good shape. All right. Sometimes technology is wonderful. Sometimes it creates a situation where you just want to choke the life out of the computer. I saw there was a cartoon the other day. It said the computer beat me at chess, but it was no match for me in kickboxing. And that's sometimes the way I feel. So what we're going to talk about is how to profit in any real estate market, because real estate markets have cycles, and there are 4 market cycles. And what's happening in the real estate market depends on the cycle, where we are. And you must know the risks and rewards of each cycle. And there are 4 cycles, and I've taught entire programs on just the cycles. But we're going to touch briefly on buyer market phase 1, buyer market phase 2, seller market phase 1, and seller market phase 2, and what is indicative of what you're going to see in each of these types of markets. Now, a buyer's market phase 1 is what we went through back in 08, 09, when real estate has really fallen off a cliff and prices are continuing to fall and the time on market is increasing. I mean, I'm done a lot of deals out in Nevada and things like that. And there were times out in Vegas where, you'd sell the property in 2 hours.
Well, at the low time, I mean, you'd be lucky if you sell the property in 2 years. So time on the market is increasing, and it's indicative that things are starting to turn. And it looks like a wave is what it is. So right here, we'd be on the top of the wave heading down. What you find is new construction's not selling. Your new home builders are offering discounts to try to get you into properties. I've seen offers of new cars. I've seen offers of 2-3 years of payments made for you. So things are starting to turn. You get a feel that there are better deals out there. You're getting excited. You're going, oh my God, I can start to buy property now. Things are starting to look good. And you're getting excited all about it. But here's the kicker. You don't know how far that market's going to fall or how long it's going to stay down. We knew that the market was turning. We knew that the market was heading down. And we basically dug a trench and dug in and said, okay, we've got a year's worth of cash reserves and we're good. Truthfully, we should have had 3 years of cash reserves, because this was one of the deepest and longest downturns that I've ever seen in my life. In fact, it's the deepest and longest downturn I've ever seen in my life. Maybe there have been deeper, but not in my lifetime, and I'm in my 50s. So that is one of the things about buyer's market phase one. You just don't know how far it's going to fall. So here's my advice. When you see a buyer's market phase one and things are downturning and property prices are starting to drop, if you're going to buy a property, only buy in an A or B neighborhood. Only an A or B neighborhood, no marginal properties, and only buy for cash flow. And I'm going to preach that as we go forward. Do not buy for appreciation. So many people got bit in the backside because they got greedy. People think the property can only go one direction and up, and I'm here to tell you that's not the case. In fact, I think real estate's heading for another downturn here over the next 2 or 3 years. But when you buy properties and you recognize a buyer market phase one, only buy in great neighborhoods with strong cash flow in place. You want to be, if you can't do that, sit on the sidelines and wait, because things are going to continue to fall, and eventually you're going to be able to pick up a bargain. A buyer's market phase two is where it gets really interesting. This is where it's a general malaise, where everybody's going, oh my God, I'm stuck with property. It just bites. There's negative news reports where property values continue to fall. People are depressed. People are underwater. Foreclosures are up. Short sales are up. It's horrible. But excess inventory on the backside of this is being bought up, because when everybody is saying how bad property is, when nobody's touching property, when nobody wants to buy, that's when you really need to be backing up the pickup truck and filling it up and buying as much as you can. I mean, how do you think Donald Trump got so rich? When everybody was bailing out of property in New York and property was cheap, he was buying. So what you want to do is wait until everybody's depressed about property and then start buying, because that's when property are starting to bottom out. Excuse me. You're also going to see the slight change in property time on the market. So instead of sitting in the market for 9 months or a year, you'll see it's all of a sudden 8 months or 7 months. You start to see things starting to turn a little bit. There's generally still not a lot of positive news reporting, but it is, if you're following the market, a time when you can make a bundle and ride the wave back up. It seems like in a buyer's market phase two that the foreclosures, you're starting to see a drop in foreclosures, short sales, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but you're starting to see that the properties that are in distressed real estate, as we call them, is starting to drop. The inventory is starting to drop. So you need to be in buying at that time. Buy everything you can, because that is where you're really going to make your money. Now, in order to do that, you need to have your lender relationships in place. What I mean by that is, by the time you recognize a buyer market phase two, but if you've got to go through and start the process from zero and build lender relationships and find banks, and while you can do it quickly, in many cases it's going to take longer than the buyer market phase two. If it takes you a year, you could have just missed out on tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in value that you could have couped or earned if you had the lender relationships in place. So start building your lender relationships and relationships with private investors and hard money, no matter where you are. Start attending RIA meetings, Real Estate Investment Association meetings, different things, and we can counsel you on some of that. But start doing the things that put in place for buying down the road. If you can't buy today, you want to start looking so that you can buy tomorrow. Also, timing varies in different parts of the country. what you're going to see is that market cycles on the East Coast and the West Coast run much more rapidly. For instance, in Miami is up and over what it was at the peak last time. I mean, if you own property, high-end property in Miami, my advice is going to be to sell it. I think you're going to see a downturn at some point. Now, people say, well, if I sell, I might miss on some upside. Well, that's true. And generally, you're going to. Frankly, you cannot time the market perfectly. By the time you see the top of the market, it's already past you. So realize and accept that if you're going to sell property and you think the market's peaked, you're not always going to capture it. It might go up for another 6 months, might go up for another year. But do you want to be sitting on the sidelines with cash waiting for more good deals to come? Or do you want to have your hat handed to you and your butt kicked when things turn and bite you and you can't dump the thing? So if you're in a buyer's market phase 2, start buying everything you can, and you're going to be very pleased down the road. And that's happening right now, talking about how good real estate is, and real estate's recovering. And what I suggest at that point, when you start seeing that, if you have smaller investor-owned properties and you are interested in moving up into bigger ones, it doesn't mean you have to. But if you are, that's the time to sell your smaller properties and to buy into larger properties, because that's going to be the best time, the best combination of price and availability. So keep in mind that seller market phase 1 is a good time to be buying, as well as buyer market phase 2. Now, seller market phase 2 is a different story. I was in a restaurant years ago and I was chatting, and this particular waitress of mine, place I went to quite a bit, was saying how she was buying investment property. I'm thinking to myself, you know, when my waitress is buying investment property, I think it's time to start selling. And because when the non-professionals are getting in on it, it's just like the stock market. When everybody's buying it, I think it's time to be selling it. I'm a bit of a contrarian in that way, is that when everybody and their brother's buying real estate or anything for that matter, I tend to move the other way and start looking for another asset class. The press, you know, in seller market phase 2, the press is in full promotion of real estate. You see all these shows on people buying and flipping homes and making hundreds of thousands of dollars, and things are looking golden, and people are buying for appreciation, not cash flow. Now, this is the kiss of death. If you are buying, heed my words, buy for cash flow. Do not buy for appreciation. Appreciation is your bonus. It's not what you want to be buying for, because that can turn around and hurt you badly. A negative cash flow on a property is a horrible situation to be in. You'll also see prices being driven up. I see that now in a lot of markets where we're buying foreclosures, is that the prices are going up. I mean, people are bidding and bidding and bidding to the point where it makes no sense. What is happening is that new investors have taken some little course somewhere, and they think now that they know everything there is to know, and they're making some mistakes. What happens is that instead of being focused on buying for cash flow, like I'm telling you to do here, they're thinking that they're going to buy and flip. They're going to buy and fix it and resell it. Well, that's a viable business model if you know what you're doing. But if you don't, it's a viable model to go bankrupt. When you buy for cash flow, when you buy investment properties that are making money and putting money in your pocket each and every month, that is stability. That is security. If you want to get into some of these other things, that's great. But if you're looking for financial security and long-term wealth, that is where you find it, is in cash flow. It is not in getting involved and bidding up properties and buying for appreciation, hoping that there's a bigger sucker coming down the road to buy the bloody thing from you. So in a seller market phase 2, though, what you're starting to see is the prices are still pretty high, but you're starting to see them giving away a few things like, 2 months free, or a free kitchen package, or new baths, or something. You're starting to see some incentives being offered, and the time on the market's going up. And this is where you're in seller market phase 2, and this is where you need to be dumping any properties that you don't want to hold and get into cash, because the things are about to teeter off the cliff and it's going to bite you. So this is where I'm saying that you can sell. Some people think, well, I sold 6 months too early, or I sold a year too early. Maybe. But on the other hand, what if you'd waited 2 years? You would be taking $100,000 less than you're getting now. So keep in mind that you can't predict the future with 100%. If you're looking for security and financial long-term wealth, you need to run with the odds, and you need to work smart and not get crazy with what you're doing. And don't follow the herd. When the herd is doing something, I strongly suggest you think about going somewhere else. Don't follow the lemmings off a cliff. Get different, get ahead of it. And if there's a downturn, you think there's a downturn in the market, get your properties on the market and sell them at a good price, but get them off your books. Now, if you've got cash flowing properties, don't worry about it. Just sit on them and relax and enjoy, and continue to collect the cash flow, continue to improve the properties, and you're going to make out like a bandit long term. Now, you want to find the Goldilocks property, as I like to call it, but it's true. It's just like dating. Buying property is a lot like dating, and you got to kiss a lot of frogs. And everybody on the webinar today, I'm sure, has kissed a lot of frogs in their dating relationship. And you need to understand it's a numbers game, and you can't get emotional about it. 5 to 10% of properties may warrant a second look. And that's why I put up that real estate calculator where you guys could grab that, because what I wanted you to do is that is how I actually go through and check a property to see if it even warrants a second look. And frankly, most properties are priced too high. And it doesn't pay to spend a lot of time looking at them because it's not going to cash flow. And that calculator that I gave you is one of those things that can give you that information very quickly without driving around and looking to see if it's actually going to be a decent property. Now, I do recommend looking at a lot of properties, even if they're not going to cash flow. And the reason is because you want to see a couple things. One is you want to see what those properties are selling for, and then compare that to what they're asking and look at the cash flow off of that property. So you know, okay, this area is not going to work very good. This price point with this rent is not going to work very good. And the second thing is you want to start seeing what's good and bad as far as what repairs need to be made, you know, what you see as far as maintenance. And the only way to get good at that, ladies and gentlemen, is actually do it. I wish there was a way I could tell you that you don't have to, but you actually got to get in there and actually look at this stuff in order to know to start recognizing good from bad. And when you look at a lot of properties, you also start to know neighborhoods, so that when you see a good deal come up, when you see a property come up, you can go, wow, that actually looks is a great neighborhood. It's a great area. I think I'm going to go take a peek at that. You also start to learn what the tenants expect for the price of the rent. So if the property in that area is renting for $750, let's say it's a little 1 or 2 bedroom and it's renting for $750, I mean, that could be $1,750 or more on a coast. You look at that and you go, okay, these are the types of amenities these properties have. This is the quality of the kitchen. This is the quality of the bathroom. So that will give you a little better feel for what people expect for what they're paying. And that's something you're going to need to know long term. Now, I have bought a lot of foreclosure properties over the years. My clients and investors have bought a lot of foreclosure properties over the years. And foreclosure properties have really peaked in most areas of the country. We've done a ton of business out in Nevada. We've done business throughout the country. And it's getting harder and harder to get foreclosures right now because they're often getting bid up. But they are still out there, and they are a nice, viable way to find properties. But foreclosure properties are also known as bank owned, or REO, which stands for real estate owned. You'll see a lot of people saying, well, it's an REO. And you go, well, what the heck's an REO? Basically, it's a foreclosure. So it's just a language used by people in the know, people in the industry. There's also something out there called a shadow inventory. Now, shadow inventory is properties that have been foreclosed but are not back on the market. And what I'm seeing is the shadow inventory that the banks actually are holding. In a number of cases that I've seen, the banks actually aren't releasing these properties onto the market. they've actually rented them out. Now, years ago, the federal government required that any bank that got a property back had to sell it in a very short period of time. But what I'm finding now is that the banks are allowed to hold them for many years. So some banks have set up their own management companies, are actually renting the properties out, waiting for the market to come back, knowing that eventually they'll be able to sell it and get their money back and do very well and make some cash flow in the interim. So that is the case in some areas. What you do see is you see a lot more single family foreclosures, and single families can be a good investment. The reason I recommend multifamily is that if you buy it right, the multifamily unit, the other units can pay all or most of your expense. With a single family, if you were to live in it, obviously it's now owner occupied, there's no cash flow. And if you put somebody in it and they are to move, you lose 100% of your cash flow. If you have a 2-unit and somebody moves, you only lose 50% of your cash flow. If you have a 4-unit and somebody moves, you only lose 25% of your cash flow. That's why the bigger properties do provide a little more stability and cash flow, but it comes with its own set of problems. Now, when you're buying a bank-owned property, keep in mind that your state might have all these forms. Like where I'm from, the state has forms you must use. Guess what? The banks don't use them. The banks don't care. The banks ignore state law. I don't know how they get away with it, but they do. So the bank, you might fill out a form, an offer on your state form, but the bank's going to send you their own contract, and you don't have a choice. You can either sign it or not sign it. Generally, it just outlines the terms that the bank's going to accept, and it usually mirrors what's on the state form, but not always. So be aware that if you're buying a foreclosure, you're probably going to be signing the bank's form. It's going to be different than what you're used to seeing if you're used to investing. And it's going to have, you don't have a choice. You either sign it or you don't do the deal. There's also time frame differences. For instance, when you're buying a foreclosure, it used to be that when a foreclosure came on the market, you could make an offer and have an answer generally in 1 to 3 days. Now what's happening in many cases, the banks won't even look at any offers for 2 weeks. So what they're trying to do is create a bit of a bargaining or a bid up war. So what will happen is they'll price it. In some cases, they'll actually price it lower than it should be priced, because then they generate a lot of excitement. They get multiple offers. And then they come back and do something called a multiple counter. And what that basically says are a highest and best in some cases. And what the highest and best says is that we've got multiple offers on this property, and we're giving everybody a chance to come back and give us their best and final price, and we're going to accept a property or an offer from there. So when you see that, know that that's a technique that's being used to leverage up the property value. And if you see that, you can stay where you are. You can actually keep your bid where it is. You can actually raise your bid, or you can drop out. In many cases, you actually do have to respond, even if you're going to hold your bid at the same price. But keep in mind that that just shows that you're in a bit of a buyer's market phase 2, where properties are being bid up. Pricing is all over the board. Sometimes you'll see foreclosures priced well that are sold at a regular time on the market. Sometimes they'll underprice it, which is one of the techniques I even use on some of my properties to get a bidding war started. Other times they'll be overpriced. There's not a lot of stability or a lot of predictability in how they're going to price things. And negotiating with the bank, you don't get a lot of choice. When you're dealing with Bank of America or Wells Fargo, believe me, you can't call them and just say, negotiate with them, because they don't care. Some cases in smaller banks, if it's a local small bank, in some cases on a foreclosure, if a local small bank holds it, you can actually talk to them. But on the big boys, I guarantee you, I can't guarantee you, you can't, but I guarantee you, I haven't ever been able to actually get somebody to negotiate with me on that, because they've got thousands of these things. And this is just one little home or one little property. And it's going to go through their traditional process. They're not going to generally make any exceptions. Financing a bank owned, you normally got to have your financing arranged, because they're going to require it. If you're going to be offering cash, and let's say one of these properties, and I'll often use investors, we'll bring in investor money and we'll offer cash. Well, we have to provide proof of financing. In that case, we have to show that the person buying it, the investor, has that amount of money in a bank account, in a money market, somewhere like that. So keep in mind that when you're buying a foreclosure property, you got to have your financing arranged. You got to have something in place that's going to allow you to proceed, because they're going to require it. And generally under foreclosure properties, they'll allow you to do inspections, but they generally won't make any repairs. They're going to have it's almost all foreclosure properties. In fact, everyone I've ever seen is going to say as is or as is where is. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do an inspection. As is simply means we're not going to do anything. You can inspect it all you want, but we're not going to do anything. But I generally recommend an inspection, especially starting out, because you don't want to buy something that's got a lot of problems. And we're going to go through that in one of the next modules. But if I bought properties that I didn't inspect, and almost always I come to regret that decision. So even if they won't make the repairs, it's good news to know what you're actually going to be getting into. Now, foreclosed properties can be found in a lot of different places. You can find foreclosed properties on the MLS. You can sign up on various lists. You can look on Zillow, Trulia, LoopNet, different things like that. And we'll talk more about that, where to find properties in a second. Now, short sales are a different animal. Short sales are where the property owner still owns the property, but they want to sell the property, but the property is not worth what they owe. So they're asking the bank to basically take a haircut, to take less than they're owed on the note. Some banks will do it, some won't. Some will just let it go to foreclosure. Negotiating a short sale, sometimes real estate agents will negotiate them. I generally use an attorney if I'm going to have anybody negotiate it. But I have found that about 50% of short sales actually make it to closing. So short sales are a little tougher, but they often can be a pretty good deal, because on a short sale, what happens is that really the seller doesn't care what you offer in many cases, because guess what? They're getting zero anyway. They owe more than the property is ever going to be worth realistically. So what I'll do in some cases, if I think the market value on this property is 200, and let's say I might come in and offer 150. And the reason I do that is because the seller really doesn't care, because the seller isn't going to generally be paying it. Normally, if it's owner occupied, the banks waive any what they call deficiency judgment, meaning that people don't have to pay the difference between what's owed and what they actually sell it for. So if I come in with a low offer and the seller accepts, that does not mean we have a deal. What it means is that now the deal goes to the bank, and the bank will decide if we have a deal. And under the law, the banks are supposed to respond in 30 days. And generally speaking, they ignore it once again. It's an interesting animal, short sales and foreclosures, and how the banks ignore federal and state regulations, but they do. Now, in a short sale, the seller is supposed to provide all their financials and hardship letters and all this stuff to the bank. The bank then says, okay, it looks like they can't pay it, and we're just going to let them out. We're going to accept less than they're owed rather than go into foreclosure. Sometimes they'll do it, sometimes they won't. Now, the buyer, on the other hand, doesn't have to stop looking at property. That's what I love about it. What I do when I make a short sale offer is I only offer a small amount of earnest money, meaning I might only offer $50 or $100 in earnest money. And the reason is that there's no guarantee this is going to close by any stretch of the imagination. So you don't want to tie up a lot of money in offers on short sales. So if you're going to make an offer on a short sale, you only offer a small amount of money. Now, a real estate agent or a lender might kick a little bit, but frankly, you don't want to tie up that money, because I've seen short sales take a year, and I've seen short sales go a year and then not close. Well, if you've got all your money tied up, what are you going to do? So you've got to be smart about that. If they require a huge down payment on or a security deposit, or not a security deposit, I'm sorry, an earnest money deposit on that, I generally just pass. So I try to put down the minimal amount of earnest money as I can. And then I generally give them 60 to 90 days to complete the short sale. After the 60 to 90 days, if they don't complete it, I can either stay in the deal or I can get out of the deal. And that's the nice thing about it, is that if I can start making multiple offers, and after a period of time, if let's say I'm making an offer on a short sale, I might actually only give them 30 days to complete it. And I might make another offer on a property and give them another 30 days. But what happens then is that if I get one accepted, I'll go ahead and cancel the other offers. And even if I lose my earnest money, it's only $50 to $100. Who cares? So that allows you to start making multiple offers on those types of properties. So I really do like short sales, but keep in mind, there's often an attorney involved. You can do all your inspections, and generally you need to make sure that your contingency for, let's say, financing or inspections, don't start running until the bank approves the short sale. Because remember, the fact that the seller signs a short sale doesn't mean squat. It's only when the bank signs off on it. But you don't want to have to pay for an inspection and all these outgoing cash outlays if the thing isn't going to close. So make sure that your contract states that your contingencies don't start running until the bank delivers written approval of the short sale. So keep looking, and if you find something you like better, you can go ahead and terminate the old offer and simply move on. Excuse me. Now, I find websites are one of the quickest and easiest methods to find property, and there are national and local sites. One of the things you're going to find is there's some lag time on the property information because, frankly, Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com, they get their information from the multiple listing services in those areas. So what happens is that until it gets on the MLS, it's got to go through their process. So it can take time for the listing to go live. And in many cases, I've had people call and say, hey, Tom, I found this great investment property online. We call, it's been sold for months. So in some cases, these sites are not good at all about keeping the material updated. So keep in mind, if you find something on, let's say, Realtor.com, it doesn't necessarily mean it's available. But the sites I recommend using, and you can go through and there's training programs on it. You can go to YouTube and just Google, how to use Realtor.com. Same with any of these things. There are tons of videos on how to actually use these things. I'm going to show you one here in a little second. But Realtor.com is the biggest one, and it's been around about the longest, and it gives you a lot of search criteria. Generally, you've got to register to use these, and some of them charge, some of them don't. Some of them have two levels. In fact, most have two levels. One have a free level, most have a free level, and then they also have a paid subscription service. So depending on how serious you are and what you want to look at, you might look around, find out which one of these we're going over here now really catches your interest, and then decide which one you actually want to sign up for and receive information from. So Realtor.com is the biggest one. Trulia.com is another one, and they all have their pluses and minuses, but frankly, they all work much the same. So don't get real crazy about it. Don't get real upset about it. Find the one that really fits your needs the best and go with that. The other big boy is Zillow.com, and some of these sites, Realtor.com might be big in Florida, Zillow might be big in California. It really depends. But these are the sites that you want to be looking at: Realtor.com, Trulia.com, and Zillow.com. Now, LoopNet, what we're going to do is I'm going to switch screens here for a second and get into my LoopNet here. All right, one second here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to pull it up. There it is. Nope. Don't you hate that when you're looking around for the right one, for the right screen? My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I was going to open up the LoopNet screen, but LoopNet, what you'll find up here, and let me show you with the pointer, is right here. You'll see become a free member. You'll see that little laser pointer. This is the area you want to go to, and you want to go into become a free member and log in. Now, it won't give you access to all the properties, but it will give you access to quite a few. And then when you get logged in, what you want to do, you want to go to this advanced search, and that's what you want to put, because that allows you to select a state. It allows you to select the type of property. It also allows you to put in a description of the property. And one of the things I like to do under the advanced search criteria is I like to go ahead and put in owner financing or land contract. So it'll say additional terms under the advanced search, and you can search on terms. And that is wonderful because you can put in the state you're interested in, you can put in multifamily, and then you can put in and check multiple terms. You can check land contract, contract for deed, owner financing, and that'll pull up properties that the owner is willing to finance. And that's critical if you don't have any cash. So LoopNet is one of those sites that I really like for investment property, but the free site is somewhat limited, but you're going to find it still gives you a pretty good indication for what's out there. One of the new kids on the block is Listed By, and Listed By has a really nice interactive map, which I really like. So you can click on a different property or different state, and it'll actually take you to that particular state and the properties that are going to be found in that state. So what you'll find is these are the national sites that you can use, and you're also going to find local websites that are put up by local realtors. Now, the thing about local realtors is that they're going to want you to sign up for their page, and that's fine, but make sure that you don't sign up for multiple ones, or what I suggest on all these sites is use a throwaway email. But that I mean is go to Hotmail and get an account, or go to Gmail and set up another account that you're not going to use on a regular basis, but that you can use to register for all these sites. That way, all the email comes there, and it's not filling your normal email box. And that way, when you're looking for property, you can go to those sites, or you go to that email address and start looking, but you're not being bombarded otherwise. You can also go to Craigslist and Backpage. It's Craigslist.com and Backpage.com, or just Google Craigslist and Backpage, and it'll take you to the properties or to those sites. And they also have property listings, and they have good local information. You can also go, one of the things is that not all for sale by owner sites publish on the multiple listing service. The multiple listing service is owned by realtors generally, and or a real estate organization, but not all owner for sale by owner sites go there. So for instance, what you can try is go FSBO, that stands for sale by owner, and then your city name. So FSBO Washington, FSBO Detroit, FSBO Dallas. And that will probably pull up, in fact, it will pull up your for sale by owner sites, which you can also check. Now, the interesting things about for sale by owners is sometimes they're good deals, sometimes they're bad deals, but you've actually that's where it comes down to knowing your properties and knowing your neighborhoods. Now, on these local websites, as well as the national ones, you may need to register. So use the throwaway emails, and only register if the site looks good. You don't have to register for everything, because most of them are going to be sending you most of the same information. Some of the offline methods for finding properties, as you still see these methods being effective, are the penny saver magazines will often have property listings. Newspapers. Now, newspapers for advertising purposes for real estate is a dying medium. You don't see it used near as much as you used to. The real estate section in our area used to be 30, 40, 50 pages. It was huge. Now it's like 4 or 5 pages. It's because advertising costs have gotten so out of control that people now advertise on the free sites rather than taking the kick to the teeth that the newspapers. The last time I did a newspaper ad on the property, it was just for a couple days, and it was $120 just for a small three-line ad. So we got away from it too. It just gets to be too expensive. Some local areas still publish local real estate magazines, although remember, from the time that magazine get the information gets sent to the publisher till the time it gets published, a lot of those things are no longer going to be available. But if you're looking for properties, I also recommend talking to families, friends, and associates, going to real estate shows, local realtors, and also your local real estate investment clubs. If you Google real estate investment club in your area, you're going to find something. Now, if you live in a tiny town of 5,000 people, there's not going to be a real estate investment club generally. But if you Google one of the bigger cities nearby, there is. So those are the types of things that you want to be looking for and you want to start getting involved in, because those are where you're going to not only meet people who have properties to sell, you're also going to meet people who have money. Some of the lenders I use, some of the investors I use, because we tend not to use banks, we tend to use private investors, came from these real estate investment meetings. These are people, high net worth individuals, who know that there's people here that have deals and they want to get a good deal. So a lot of people do use realtors. Most residential realtors are not experts in multifamily. The turnover rate in real estate is about 80%. Over 80% of realtors are in and out within 18 months. And that's a horrible statistic. And most of the ones who survive focus primarily on single family homes. So when you're looking around on on Craigslist and a Backpage, and we're looking at the real estate magazines and newspapers, you're going to start to see realtors who advertise multi-unit family or multifamily units. Those are the people that you want to contact. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this is tricky, on realtor.com, Trulia, Zillow, the person who shows up on that listing is not necessarily the person who has that property listed. What I have found was that these people pay to be placed. It's a pay for placement. Realtors pay these companies to actually have their name featured. So when you call, if it's not their particular listing, don't be surprised. That is something that it's a little annoying, but if you look around, you can usually find who has that property listed, and that is usually who I'll want to work with. I want to work with somebody who does multifamily regularly. So your questions you want to ask is, I like a realtor who owns their own multifamily properties. Think about this. If you're involved in real estate, selling real estate and working with buyers and sellers, and you don't own property, why? I mean, don't you believe in it? Don't you think it's a great investment? And especially if you're selling multi-units, multifamily property, you don't own it. That's kind of the kiss of death. I mean, that's one of the questions I asked my accountant too. My old accountant, didn't own any property. And, with us owning property, I want somebody who owns the property, who understands it from an accounting perspective, who actually has it and is managing their own. So I switched accountants too, because I wanted somebody who owns multifamily, and I definitely want that in a realtor. I want to know, do they work with investors only or owner occupants? It really doesn't matter, but I like to know where their focus is, because a lot of realtors are stuck in tradition, meaning if you need an owner finance deal, a land contract, most realtors aren't going to touch you with a 10-foot pole. I hate to tell you that, but it's true, because what they want to do is they want to work with somebody who's got money or is going to do a traditional loan, and that's a lot easier, a lot less work for them. Most are not familiar with owner financing, and most won't even give you the time of day if that's the type of financing you need. But on occasion, you'll find one that will, and you've got to shop around. Remember, if you've got some cash, there's no smoke blowing on this. It's easier to buy. If you don't have cash, it's harder to buy. It's not impossible to buy. I started with basically no cash. I had to beg, borrow, and grab everything I could to get mine done, my first properties. But what it is that it is doable, and you've got to suck it up and come up with a reason inside you that it's worth going through the work to do it. So I like to find out a little bit about the realtors and what they know, and how many multifamily properties do they sell a year is a good one. The realtors are generally going to want you to sign something called a buyer agency agreement. Now, a buyer agency agreement, depending on the state, some states, if you're working with a realtor, by law, they have a duty to look after your best interest. In other states, like in Wisconsin, which is where we have some property, the realtor has a duty to the seller, even if they don't know the seller. The fiduciary duties to the seller, unless there's something called a buyer agency agreement. And the buyer agency agreement says the fiduciary duty, the duty to do the right thing, now forces the realtor to look after the buyer's best interest, not the seller, which is obviously what you want. But the thing about a buyer agency agreement is that you can be stuck with somebody you don't like. So make sure that there's a cancellation clause, that if you don't like them, you can cancel at any time, generally prior to an offer being accepted. The cancellation clause I insist on is a buyer may cancel at any time prior to accepted offer. And that gives me an out if I find that they're not doing your job, or they're not working with me and creating a situation where they can send me properties. Mentoring is important. Now, some people use me for a mentor, as I've mentioned. We do coaching, and one of the reasons we give away our free training is to give people a chance, so you can get a feel for what we're like to work with and what we bring to the table. And some people sign up and some don't. That's fine. But excuse me. The mentor relationship is one where you find somebody who's actually done it before. And real estate investment clubs are a great place to find a mentor, because these people actually own property. In some cases, they'll let you work with them. Sometimes they will give you a referral to somebody who actually will teach you or guide you. Some of these real estate investment clubs do offer some free training, although a lot of it you pay for. So the investing clubs are a good place. Successful investors, people like me, will do it. Will give you a certain level of training. Obviously, a lot of them just feel it's worthwhile to pay it back, pay it forward, it's called. But why would someone work with you, you might ask? Well, first off, some won't. I mean, some people simply don't have the time of day for you, and that's just the way it works. So don't get upset if they're not going to work with you. But some people want to do something to give back. They've been successful. Others want a piece of your deal. I mean, we've done mentoring for people and taken a piece of the deal rather than having them pay us cash. And others do it for compensation. And for people we coach on a private basis, we actually do charge for that. But that's how you get someone to work with you. So there's a number of different ways to find somebody to work with you, but it is important to do and find someone that's actually going to take you through. Now, we're going to do the math here quick before this lunch break, but math is a critical component on any deal. And you need to know where to find the numbers. And if the property is listed, a lot of the numbers are going to be on what they call the MLS sheet. And it is easy with a bit of practice, but you need to run the numbers before looking at the property, because you don't want to drive all over town trying to figure out where the property is and if it's any good if the numbers don't make any sense. I mean, it's simply a waste of your time, and you want to maximize the return on your time. Now, this is key. You're going to see on rents and on you're going to often see something called pro forma rents. When you see pro forma, think lie. Pro forma is simply what the seller says the rents could be versus what they actually are. This is the biggest load of manure that you're going to see in real estate, or one of the biggest loads of manure. So what happens is the owner wants to sell the property for some future value, for a value that it would be worth if the rents were, say, $500 higher. So they use pro forma rents in order to try to justify their expenses. But what they want you to do, guys, is to pay them for work you have to do. You have to do the work to fix up the property or to get the rents up. You have to find the new tenants, whatever it takes, and they want you to pay them for that. So do not accept pro forma rents or expenses. You need to see the actuals. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you buy pro forma, you're going to lose money from day one. And you need to verify everything. I've had people say, oh, I'd never lie. I'd never do this. I'd never do that. And, you know, I have found that people who profess they would never lie are the ones I grab my wallet. So be careful on these actual versus pro forma. I hope I've drilled that in enough that pro forma means lie. Do not do that. What I want to know is I want to see the actual rents. And that's going to come off a Schedule C, and I want to get that from their actual tax return. So in my offer, I'm going to ask for the last 2 or 3 years of tax returns on the property. I'm going to ask for all the expenses, and then I'm going to go back and verify them. I also want to know how long has the rent been at that level. I'm going to want to see the leases on the property. I'm also going to do a rent survey, meaning I'm going to call other other apartments and other buildings that are near there. So I'm buying in a particular neighborhood, and I notice a home for rent down the way. I'm going to call and see what that thing's renting for. I see a 4-unit, and I see they got an available unit. I'm going to call and find out, well, if the rent there is $750 and the one I'm looking at is only $600, there might be some opportunity to actually raise the rents and actually make more money. And that should be a bonus to you. That should not be going back to that pro forma where the landlord's saying, well, the neighborhood's renting for $750, we just haven't raised the rents. What I always say to that is I always say, well, then you go back, you raise the rents, you have the tenants sign new leases, and then we'll give you, we'll base our offer on that number. But you want to know if the rents in that building are high, low, or right on. You also need to verify other expenses. And some of those expenses are gas, electric, water, and sewer. Now, depending on where you live and who provides those, you're going to run into a different situation. In some areas where the government provides water, sewer, or it's a government-owned electricity or gas company, in many cases, if the tenants don't pay, the landlord is liable, which is crazy. You don't have any say in if they give a tenant utilities, but we've been in situations where the tenant hasn't paid their heat for the winter, and we've gotten the bill because it's a government-owned entity, or the entity, the company has successfully lobbied the government to require that the landlords be on the hook, which is pure insanity. We try to avoid that wherever we can. In some of our properties, we do pay water and sewer because the government does require that. But what you find is that if you're paying the expenses, the tenants tend to use a lot more of it. And if the tenant's technically liable for it, but they can back bill you if the tenants don't pay, that's a challenging situation to be in. And you need to be on top of that and make sure what expenses you could be liable for. You also want to know about the turnover history, because if you see people moving out every year and the leases are all 1 year long, it tells you a couple things. One is it's either got high crime, or there's some bad tenants, or there's bad people in the area. Because if people aren't staying, it tells you something else is wrong. If your downstairs units are moving every year, that tells me that the upstairs units are loud, or that the insulation in the building is not good, and that people are tired of the noise above them. So be aware of, you want to look at the turnover history, because that can tell you an awful lot about how that property is operating. And you want 2 to 3 years of history. Also want to look at other income. Some properties will have laundry income, parking income, and garage rentals, storage units. But I always want a 2-year history on that income to count. A lot of times when sellers are getting their properties ready to sell, they'll start charging for these things, try to add that to the rent, and then base their asking price based on that. Well, that's nice, and that's all well and good, but if they haven't had at least a 2-year history, I only count 50% of that income toward the cash flow for the property, because it just hasn't been there long enough. The cash flow hasn't been coming in long enough to be sure that that's going to continue to be there. Now, the monthly expenses, your gas, all these other expenses, your electricity, water, sewer, need careful due diligence. And you need to call the companies that provide these services and ask what they are. You also need to look at the Schedule C, which is a tax return where the investor or the seller has put the income from the property and all the expenses. Now, keep in mind that the seller obviously, or not obviously, but generally wants to minimize what they're showing for income and maximize what they're showing for expenses. But that aside, that gives you a little lever when you're coming in to negotiate the deal. But some of the utilities you need to be aware of is gas, electric, water and sewer, trash and cable. And you need to know who pays it and who's responsible if it's not paid. In some cases, like a lot of our properties, if the tenants don't pay, the utility company's got to go after the tenants. They can't come after me. In other of our properties, if the tenants don't pay, the utility companies can come after us as a landlord, which we don't like and which we account for in how we buy our properties. We try to buy them at a little bit of a discount because of that. Also, if your average utility cost is high, that's going to affect your cash flow or turnover. It's going to affect your cash flow if you pay it. It's going to affect your turnover if you don't. If you have buildings that, let's say, use electric heat in the snow belt, and the utility bill is $250 a month and the rent $750, I can guarantee you that those people are not going to stay generally. So you need to be aware of who's paying for it and how it's going to impact your turnover. The delinquent utilities, if you have any potential liability on delinquent utilities, you want to make sure that the utility company notifies you if the tenants get behind. You also need to keep a number for maintenance. I like to put aside 10% for maintenance on each of my properties and 10% for long-term expenses, because that gives me enough cash in the bank when these expenses come up, because they will. If you're spending every dime and you're not allowing for these expenses, you're going to get some ugly surprises. You also need to be escrowing for taxes or putting money aside for taxes. If you have a bank loan, in most cases, they're going to require you to escrow, which means put away 1/12 of the taxes and 1/12 of the insurance each month. If they don't require it, if it's a private money, if it's a private investor, or the bank for some reason doesn't require it, you still need to be putting that aside, because at the end of the year, that bill's coming due and you have to have the cash to pay it. Same with insurance. Be sure you're putting money aside for those expenses. You also need to have a vacancy factor. What you'll see is these landlords saying, well, we haven't had a vacancy in 3, 4, or 10 years. We never have vacancy. We're always rented. Well, I've never seen a property that's always rented. You have to put in a number that makes some sense. Generally, if they don't have a number, if they say there's no vacancy, I'll use 10%. If it's more than 10%, I'll definitely use the higher number. And when you go and look at our profit calculator, you're going to see all these things are in there for you to enter so that you know what to be accounting for in determining whether you've got a deal or not. So that profit calculator we gave you for free will guide you on that. But make sure you put in a vacancy factor. If there's been no vacancy, say in 5 years or something like that, I'll use 5%. But generally, I use 10% to be on the safe side, because I'd rather be wrong and err on the side of caution and have more money in my pocket than less. Maintenance items need to be calculated in the cash flow. Things will break. I guarantee it. Toilets will break. You often hear, well, the reason people don't want to own investment properties, they don't want to be fixing toilets at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, one of the things I did years ago is when I started replacing things, I started replacing with better. A lot of people put the cheapest crap in a property they can. And in some cases, I understand that. But when it comes to things like toilets, a good toilet or a bad toilet is $100. A toilet that'll flush down, just about anything and you'll have no problems with is probably $200. So at some point, you got to use your head and determine how much trouble you want to have on the property and what kind of thing you want to put in. Kitchen faucets, bathroom faucets, you can buy them for $20. You can buy them for $10, or you can spend $50 and never have to replace it. So it really depends. On maintenance items, what I find is that on inexpensive items where this cost spread is not that great, I tend to put in really high-end items, or not really high-end, but significantly solid items, good solid items of good reputations, long life, because I find it creates a situation where I have less maintenance down the road. You've also got maintenance items are two types, emergency and non-emergency. Most are non-emergency. Emergency if there's fire, flood, or blood. If there's a situation like that, I want to be notified right away. If it's non-emergency, generally we'll get to it the next business day. Remember, you as a property owner are not a slave to the tenant. They are a tenant. You are a provider of a service. If you have a property with 2 toilets, let's say it has 2 bathrooms, there is never a toilet emergency. It's never an emergency, because use the other bathroom, we'll get there on the next business day. And if they're responsible for plugging it up, let's say they put, the kids put a toy down there and plugged it up, they get to pay for that call as well. So non-emergency is most cases, I'll get to it, or our staff will get to it the next business day. Emergency, we get to right away. And tenant caused damage are those things that tenants will often do some damage and then say, well, we didn't do it, it's not our responsibility, but we require them to pay it. And that comes down to the plugged toilets. Plugged toilets are almost always a tenant responsibility. And if they overflow that toilet, it is definitely a tenant responsibility. We're going to back bill them for every penny to fix it. Broken plumbing, broken light fixtures, damaged windows, damaged appliances, those are almost always tenant caused damage, and you need to force the tenant to pay. Now, there's a difference between normal wear and tear and tenant damage. For instance, if the toilet is continually running, it's an older toilet and the water is continually running, and we have to replace either the guts of the toilet and the back tank or replace the toilet, that's normal wear and tear. I'm not billing a tenant for that. If the tenants live there 5 years or 6 years and the carpet's worn out, I am not billing the tenants for that. You've got to be fair and determine what's normal wear and tear and what's not. And what I do by that is when somebody moves in, we take photos and with videos on your phone, ladies and gentlemen, videotape the interior of the home, videotape them going through with you. And if it ever goes to court and they say we didn't do any damage, and you have the video showing that it was fine before they moved in and now there's damage, guess what? You win. But if you don't have that, it's your word against them. We also like to charge a service call fee. Now, that's not allowed in all areas, but some areas, some states, some municipalities won't allow it, but other places will allow us to charge a service call fee, and it's pretty minimal. That's generally, we like to charge, a tenant's responsible for the first $25 of any repair. And the reason is I like to get people to take care of the small things themselves. And the reason we put that in is we had people calling us to replace light bulbs. We finally just laid down the law and said those types of items, if we have to come and replace them, there is a service fee. But we generally like to make the tenant responsible for a little bit, not much, just so that they're disinclined to call us for minor items, but they'll definitely call us for big items. And recurring items you need to be budgeting for are like sidewalks, lawns, landscaping, pest treatment. You've got to be sure that there's money in the account for these types of things. Landscaping, unless you're doing it yourself, is one of those things that can be expensive or it can be inexpensive. Shop around. I've seen landscaping costs where they charge me $30 to mow, and I've seen people that want to charge me $100 to mow. It's the same mow, it's just a different cost. Pest treatment. If you're in an area that has pests, make sure that you get on a regular schedule and that the pest treatment is done. If a home gets infested with bed bugs or termites or cockroaches, it is a much more expensive event to get rid of them than it is to keep them out in the first place. So keep in mind, stay up on your maintenance, and your ownership experience is going to be much better. You also need to budget for the long-term repairs, and those are things like the exterior paint or siding, windows and roof, and that's why I put in 10% for maintenance and 10% for long-term repair. Now, if I'm buying a property and it's got problems, I put that into my analysis right up front because I know I'm going to have to do it right away. There's also your mechanical expenses, things like electrical systems, plumbing, heating and air conditioning. You need to make sure that you have money set aside because over time, those units need to be serviced, things need to be repaired, things need to be maintained and updated. So you need to make sure that you've got money set aside for that. On the interior, you need to make sure you're budgeting for carpet and other flooring, appliances, paint, cabinets, bathrooms, kitchen updates. Paint is generally pretty cheap. Depending on where you are, we pay anywhere from $1 to $2 a square foot, including paint, to have somebody paint it. Over the years, when I was starting out, I've painted dozens of units, so I have done it myself, but we're at the point now where we actually send that out. Appliances, years ago, appliances seemed to last longer. Now there seems to be built-in obsolescence. If it's an older property, say a C-level property, I won't always buy new appliances. You can often buy good used appliances, which the people will love. and it'll save you, anywhere from 25 to 75%. The carpet is one of the things that irritates me no end, because carpet seems to get trashed. In certain areas of the country, it tends to have flooring or vinyl or tile. Those tend to be a lot easier to take care of long term. But other areas have carpet, and if you have carpet and you need to replace it, if you can replace it with something other than that. You can go with LVT, which is luxury vinyl tile, or vinyl, or wood. You don't want it to look cheap, but when you look at the cost of carpet, a good carpet's going to run you $250, $350 a square foot. You can get cheap stuff for $1.50 to $2, but you're going to be replacing it more. And a good pad under the carpet will make it last a lot longer. So if you're going to go with a cheap carpet, spend the money on a good pad, and that carpet will go a lot longer than it would otherwise, given the grade of the carpet. Keep in mind that flooring can cause a lot of noise in your rentals, which can really affect your turnover. If you have tile upstairs and somebody's wearing shoes upstairs or high heels, or kids are playing or banging around or running toys across the floor, it is going to create a situation where you're not going to be able to keep tenants in the lower levels. So in many cases, I'll use carpet upstairs, or I'll put a rubber matting type material underneath the flooring, a thin one, which will provide some noise suppression, because I don't want my tenants downstairs being disturbed by the tenants upstairs because of the flooring choices I've made. Downstairs, you've got a lot more flexibility. Keep in mind that tile tends to be cold on the feet, especially in the northern areas. But luxury vinyl tile, which can look like wood, they've got some incredible options on that nowadays. That actually is not as cold as tile. It just doesn't transfer heat out of the person's body as fast. So luxury vinyl tile is one of those things we love. And we always want you to fall in love with the numbers. Do not fall in love with the property. Buy it wrong and it will haunt you. I've fallen in love with the property and said, I've got to have it, which puts me in a weak negotiating position. And then down the road it comes and I buy it and I can't get the numbers, and I'm going, now I got to try to get out of it and sell it to some other sucker. Well, don't do that. If you buy it wrong, it's going to haunt you. So do not buy for appreciation. I hope I'm pounding that into your head. Appreciation is your bonus. It's your money. Cash flow is the name of the game. This is what you want. Verify all your numbers independently. Don't take the seller's word on anything. I'm not saying all sellers are dishonest. I'm saying it's like Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Because once you buy it, it doesn't matter what they said, generally speaking, unless you want to try and sue them. Good luck on that. You're much better off to verify it up front and not have that situation down the road. So treat all seller numbers with skepticism. Pro forma means lie, and you make your money when you buy a property. When you buy it, you lock in long-term profitability, because you lock in what? Cash flow. And when you buy a property right, when you buy it in the right neighborhood, you create an ease of management. And that is what's going to make your ownership number, or your ownership life, much more enjoyable. So you need to analyze the numbers, the rent and other income, the monthly expenses. You need to put in a number for deferred maintenance. If the furnace is 30 years old, guess what? And it's a forced air furnace. You're going to need a new furnace in the not too distant future. Make sure you've got numbers in your budget for long-term maintenance. And on your updates, keep the property attractive to your tenants. Remember, if this is a C-level property, do not improve it to an A-level. Do not put granite countertops in there. Vinyl's just fine. On the other hand, if you've got an A-level property, you shouldn't be putting vinyl and cheap stainless steel sinks in either. You need to keep a number in there for taxes and for insurance. Now, there's something that most of you are not familiar with if you don't own investment property, and the poll came back that most of you actually do. 88% own investment property, 13% have not. Depreciation is really a bonus to you, and what it is depreciation is a tax, an accounting gimmick basically, which allows you to deduct a certain part of the cost of the property. For instance, let's say the property is valued at $200,000. I'm just using some numbers that are easy to remember. Land typically accounts for about 25% of the value of the property. So you've got $150,000. The government allows you to depreciate, depending on the type of property it is, and that's about 27 and a half years. And so you take 150 and divide that by 27 and a half years, and that's the amount you can deduct each year off your taxes for wear and tear on the property. Now, when you sell the property, if you sell it for more, you're going to need to recoup your depreciation, but that's a class for another day. But the depreciation is what they call a non-cash accounting charge. And what it does is it lowers your taxes. So if your taxes are lowered by $7,500 and you're in a 30% tax bracket, that saves you about $2,200 in taxes. So even if a property looks like it's breaking even, it might be actually putting $200 or several $100s a month into your pocket once you look at the depreciation accounting for it. Now, I like to look at appreciation just like appreciation and use that as my bonus. So I look for cash flow straight up, and then I figure the depreciation and appreciation are my bonuses for buying the property right and managing it well. Now, the numbers we're going to be dealing with going forward here are net operating income, cash flow, a few others. But net operating income is the amount of cash left over after all the bills are paid except the mortgage. So what you do to calculate it is you take the rents and income, you subtract your monthly expenses, you subtract your reserve funds, and this is for what? This is for your reserve fund, for the 10% I like to use, and this is maybe the 10% for your maintenance down the road on top of your monthly expenses. That gives you net operating income. Now, that is before you make the mortgage payment if you have one. Most people are going to. So that's called net operating income. It's cash flow after expenses but before the mortgage payment. Then you have the mortgage payment, which is often called PITI or PITA. And PITA stands for payment, interest, taxes, and insurance. And that's what your mortgage payment generally consists of. Some banks will not require you to put away taxes and insurance as part of your mortgage. Others will. But every mortgage is going to consist generally payments and interest, unless you get an interest-only mortgage, which we're not going to go into here. But your payment consists of that. And the payment, if you have a 30-year loan, the payment in interest, the payment part is enough to amortize the loan over the period of the loan, whether that be 30 years or 20 years or 15 years. And it's the interest and then the taxes and insurance. So it's basically interest, obviously, is just what's charged monthly for the use of the money. But an interesting aside and something that you can use to your advantage is that you pay more on a 30-year mortgage. You pay more on interest than you do on the mortgage, on the payment part, for 22 years. What that means is that if you make one extra payment a year, you'll cut about 8 years off the back of that payment. 8 years of payments go away if you make one extra payment a year. So that's something that we train our people to do. If you want to keep this property long term, you want to get it paid down as quick as you can. So property taxes are part of it, and the prepayments can make a big difference. The other thing is your lender, regardless of whether they require you to pay for insurance monthly as part of your payment or just make you pay it, are going to require you to name them as additional insured. What that means is that and they don't charge you extra, the insurance company doesn't, but basically what it says is that in the event the property burns to the ground or is destroyed, the loan gets paid off before any money comes to you, which is going to be typical. That's mandatory. They're not going to bend on that. So each payment typically is 1/12 of the taxes, 1/12 of the insurance, and then your interest and your payment and interest. The cap rate. Now the cap rate is basically what your rate of return would be if you didn't have a mortgage. We run into a lot of people over time, and you're going to be one of these people too, when you use these techniques that have paid off property. And the cap rate is really what it is. It's the technical term is it's the rate at which the net operating income, what's left over after all the expenses except the mortgage, repays the purchase price on an annual basis. The easiest way to think about this is to say, okay, let's say I didn't have a loan on it. That's the easiest way to think about it. The cap rate is going to be the free cash flow. That means net operating income. Remember, that's your total rents minus your expenses divided by what you paid for it. So in this particular case, let's say after our expenses, we have $12,000 and we paid $150,000 of the property. We divide the $12,000 by the $150,000 and you've got an 0.08 or 8% return on your investment. So if you had paid cash for the property, you'd basically be making 8% on the money you put into the property. And it's similar to an interest rate on your money. It's not the same, but it's very similar. Then you have cash flow. Now, most of us are working with cash flow because cash flow is a little bit different animal in that cash flow is what's left over after our mortgage payment. So the cash flow is the net operating income minus the debt service. And that doesn't include, now keep in mind, this is where it gets a little tricky. When cash flow does not include the taxes and insurance, that goes in your expenses on your calculation on that sheet we gave you on the profit calculator, there's a separate line for taxes and insurance. So when you're calculating your payment, and when you use our calculator that's built in there, it doesn't have taxes and insurance in there. Taxes and insurance are technically part of your expense. So you just need to be aware of the difference. Let's say the cash flow was $12,000 as in the previous example, and our debt service is $8,886. That means our cash flow is $3,114. Now, on most properties, remember, only 5 or 10% of properties are going to cash flow. So that's why you've got to look at a lot of properties. So when you look at the cash flow, normally it's going to be negative. And that generally means the property is overpriced and you need to negotiate on the price or terms. Otherwise, you can't do a deal on that property. Lastly, the cash-on-cash return is the return on your down payment and other acquisition costs. What that means is how much did you have to put down on a property versus how much are you making on it on a yearly basis. So you take the annual cash flow and divide it by your down payment and your closing funds. For instance, let's say you're doing a loan on a property for $100,000 and you're putting 10% down. And the cash flow, which is $10,000, and your cash flow is $1,500 a year. What you need to do is you simply take that cash flow, remember that's after your mortgage payment, and divide it by your down payment. In this case, we're making $1,500 after everything. Now, cash flow is after everything. This is money in your pocket, divided by the $10,000 we put down, and my cash flow on that, or cash-on-cash return, is 15%, ladies and gentlemen, and that's on $10,000. Well, at 18%, your money doubles every 4 years. So the cash-on-cash return on something like this, when you're seeing numbers like this, a cash-on-cash return of north of 10, 12, 15%, it's a good deal. This is the real estate calculator that we've given you for free. And on here, what you're going to see is you're going to see the number of units up above here. I'm using a laser pointer, so keep an eye out. The purchase price. You're going to see the scheduled rents. That's if you collected 100%, which you never do. And then what you're going to do is you put in the vacancy factor. You'll see here I use 10%. Any concessions on rent if you're going to have to pay to get people in, things like that. Then you've got your total rental income after vacancy, and your other income is like your laundry or parking. Then you can see here we've got all of our expenses. And then we've also got a number for a management fee. Now, if you're managing yourself, that number might be zero. But if you're paying a management company, you definitely got to account for it. You got to account for marketing and your utilities and also any contract services that you're paying. Okay? Then the calculator will actually calculate your net operating income. It'll calculate your capital expenditures, and it'll also do your first mortgage if you enter your numbers over here on the right. This is where you put your mortgage information, how much you're going to be borrowing, what percent down, and you only need to put in, ladies and gentlemen, the gray areas. The rest are calculated for you. So you've got your percent down, that'll automatically populate this, and then you put how long your loan term is, what your interest rate is going to be on that right here, and it's going to give you your mortgage payment, and it's going to carry it down over here for you, right here on the lower left. You also have your closing costs and any loan points or things of that nature, and then it's going to go ahead and give you your cash-on-cash return. And you can see here in this case, it's negative. So the real estate calculator allows you to crunch some numbers very quickly to see if you've got a deal or if it's a dog and you don't want to move on with it. So one of the things we're going to just touch on very briefly here is private coaching, and we're going to go into it more detail at the end. And in a second here, I'm going to let you guys grab our online training program for free. But basically, private coaching, for those of you who are interested, if you decide you need more help, is a program where we actually work with you 2 times a month. We do phone calls with you every month. Usually it's only for 6 months, and it's usually with one of my coaches. In this particular case, it's going to be me personally. You won't be working with anybody else. It'll be me working with you from the beginning to the end of the program. And our goal is to go ahead and get you into your first property. So we're going to hook you up and give you some more information on this later. We just want to put it in your mind that we do offer this for those who feel that even after everything we're going through, they want more help. You have the option to actually contact us and work with us going forward. So what we're going to do here now is I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go get the one second here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, there we go. What we're going to do here is, for some reason, our app is giving us a little trouble. And for some reason, I can't seem to open that up right now. So after lunch, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, and I've got to see what's going on with the system here right now. Apparently, it's given us a little trouble. So we will go ahead and have to relog into the Hangout. So what I want you to do is we're going to need everybody, and I apologize. This is terribly inconvenient. This is a system glitch for us. We're going to need you to log out and then go ahead and log back in. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to have to stop the broadcast and log back in order to get this to work. And we'll see what we can do here. One second, ladies and gentlemen. Some days you just have a little trouble with the technology. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to log out and log back in. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. I'm going to go ahead and reopen the Google chat room. What I'd like you to do is log back in, and we're going to go ahead and take a 30-minute lunch break. So I've got 12:49 is the time, 12:50. So we're going to take a break to 1:20, and then we're going to start off. And the first thing we're going to do when we start off is I'm going to give you access to our online training course that you can get for free, no charge whatsoever, and it kind of mirrors this course. So I will see you in 30 minutes, and until then, you have a nice lunch. And remember, you're going to have to log off and then log back on in order to log back into the chat room. Once again, I apologize. For some reason, our technology is giving us a little trouble today. So we will see you in 30 minutes.